Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was camping alone in Tall Pines Reserve about an hour outside of Grayford. I'd gone there a bunch of times with friends, but this was the first time I went solo. I'd had a rough couple of weeks at work and just wanted a night away from everything. It was late September, cool enough that you needed a jacket after sunset, but not cold enough for frost. The air smelled like pine sap and wet earth, and the forest had that constant low hum of insects, wind through branches, and distant water from the nearby creek. I set up my tent in one of the dispersed spots off the main trail, far enough from other campers that I couldn't hear or see anyone. I made a small fire, cooked some ramen, and listened to the usual nighttime forest soundtrack. It was comforting in a weird way, messy, random, alive. I remember checking my phone around 10 p.m. just to see the time. No service, like always out there. I put it in airplane mode to save battery and tucked it in my jacket pocket. The fire was dying down, so I added a couple logs and stretched out on the folding chair. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just enjoying the quiet. Then the sound changed. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone hit mute on the entire forest. 1 second I heard crickets, owls, wind, distant movement in the brush. The next, nothing. Not silence like stillness, but silence like emptiness. I sat up straight, immediately alert, because the shift felt wrong. Even the usual rustling from small animals moving around the undergrowth was gone. I held my breath without meaning to, listening for anything. My fire crackled softly, but beyond that, the woods were absolutely still. I thought maybe a predator was nearby. Coyote, mountain lion, something that could freeze everything else in place. That happens sometimes, but this didn't feel like that. It wasn't that the animals stopped, it was that the whole forest paused. Even the wind stopped. The trees around me, which had been swaying gently a minute earlier, were perfectly still. I stood up, not wanting to, but feeling like staying seated made me too vulnerable. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. My tent, my gear, even the fire felt farther away somehow, like the space around me had expanded. Then I saw the light. It came from deeper in the woods, maybe 40 or 50 yards past the edge of my campsite. A faint blue glow, not bright enough to illuminate the ground, but enough to outline the trees between us in a soft halo. It pulsed very slowly, almost like breathing. Not a flashlight, not a lantern. Too smooth, too colorless. I froze. I tried to tell myself it was another camper, maybe walking with some kind of weird LED lamp. But nobody was camped anywhere near me, and this glow didn't move like someone walking. It hovered behind the trees, just high enough to be above eye level, but low enough that it was definitely not the moon or anything in the sky. The forest stayed silent. I don't know how long I watched it. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. The glow flickered slightly, not like it was malfunctioning, but like something passed in front of it. The blue deepened for a moment, then faded lighter again. Without thinking, I reached for my phone. When I pressed the button, the screen stayed black. Not dead, not low battery, it just wouldn't turn on. I pressed the button again, nothing. I squeezed the sides, thinking maybe I accidentally shut it off, but it wouldn't respond at all. My first irrational thought was that the light had something to do with it. When I looked up again, the glow dimmed sharply, shrinking as if it was pulling inward. It didn't move away. It collapsed like someone folding a piece of paper into itself, and then it winked out completely. Right after it vanished, the forest slowly exhaled. It started with a single cricket, chirping once, then another. Then a rustle in the underbrush. Leaves shifting, the faint hoot of an owl somewhere far off. The wind returned, brushing through the pines as if it had been held back and finally released. I realized I had been gripping my phone so tightly my hand hurt. The sounds returning didn't comfort me the way I expected. Instead, it made everything feel weirdly staged, like someone had hit unpause on the environment. I sat back down, watching the tree line where the light had been. My fire seemed too loud now. Every crackle made me jump a little. Penny wasn't there with me this time. I kept wishing she was, not because she'd protect me, but because maybe she'd at least react to something I couldn't see. I tried turning my phone on again. This time it lit up immediately, 10:42 p.m. No missed notifications. No sign anything had been wrong with it at all. I didn't pack up and leave right away, mostly because the idea of wandering through that forest in the dark felt worse than staying put. I added more wood to the fire and stayed awake until I physically couldn't anymore. Every few minutes I'd look toward the trees, half expecting the blue glow to flicker back to life. It didn't. When I finally went into the tent, I kept the zipper halfway open so I could hear the forest better. I don't know why I thought that would help. The usual sounds were back, but they felt different, like background noise rather than something natural. I fell asleep in short bursts, waking every hour. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to what sounded like a tree creaking. Not unusual, except it repeated with the same timing twice, like someone imitating it. I held still, listening. Nothing followed, no footsteps, no movement, just the creak and then silence. I didn't sleep again after that. When morning light finally filtered through the branches, everything looked normal. I made coffee, packed up slowly, and walked over to the place where I thought I'd seen the glow. There were no footprints, not even mine unless I forced myself through the brush. The ground wasn't disturbed, no scorch marks, no broken branches, nothing. The only thing that stood out was the smell. A faint, metallic tang in the air, almost like rain but sharper, even though the forecast had been completely dry. By the time I reached my car, the smell had faded. My phone was working fine. The forest sounded like any other forest. But even now, months later, when I think about how everything stopped at once, the wind, the insects, the whole living sound of the woods, it feels unreal in a way nothing else has. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I see that faint blue reflection behind my eyelids, pulsing once like it's reminding me it was real. I was walking the beach behind my rental place in Surfview, a small coastal town in Oregon where my friend Evan had let me use his cabin for a few days. It was early September, warm during the day, but cold enough at night that the sand felt damp and the air smelled like salt and cedar. I'd gone out around 11 p.m. because I couldn't sleep, and the ocean usually helped with that. There was no wind, which was strange for that stretch of coast. The waves were steady and low, almost too calm. Even the usual distant hum of the highway was absent. It felt like the whole coastline had gone quiet except for the water. I walked barefoot near the tide line, jeans rolled up, holding my sandals in one hand. The moon wasn't bright, just a thin slice hanging above the water, but the sky was clear enough to see a few scattered stars. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to wear myself out so I'd sleep better. I'd gone maybe half a mile when I saw the lights. They were way out past the breakers, far enough that at first I thought they were fishing boats. A straight row of 4 or 5 white lights, evenly spaced, hovering above the water. Not bright, but distinct, like someone had lined up lanterns on a dark horizon. I stopped walking and squinted, trying to figure out how many there were. The spacing was too perfect for boats, and none of them swayed or flickered. They were just still. I tried to remember if there were any offshore platforms out here, but there weren't. This part of the coast didn't have anything like that. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, waiting for one of the lights to drift or tilt or show any sign of being on a vessel. Nothing. The water between me and them moved in soft waves, but the lights stayed dead still. Not bobbing, not moving sideways, just fixed in place. I felt uneasy, but not scared yet, mostly confused. I kept watching. Then the first one dropped. It didn't blink out or dim. It moved downward, straight down, as if someone lowered it on a cable. There was no splash, no reflection. It just sank into the ocean like it was being swallowed by the dark water. The second light started descending a few seconds later. Same motion, same lack of sound or disturbance, like the water wasn't even being touched. I took a step back without meaning to. My feet sank into the cold sand, and I realized how quiet everything had become. Even the waves sounded softer, more distant. The third and fourth lights went down almost together, one slightly faster than the other. By the time they disappeared below the waterline, only one remained. A faint white dot hovering above the ocean, like it was considering what to do next. I pulled out my phone to take a video, but as soon as I opened the camera app, The last light dimmed to half its brightness. I froze, phone halfway up. The light held steady for a long moment, as if it was waiting for something. Then it dropped, faster than the others, like whoever or whatever was controlling it had changed its mind. I lowered my phone slowly. The screen was reflecting my own face, pale and confused, because the ocean in front of me was now completely dark. No boats, no lights, nothing. I listened for any sound that would tell me I'd misinterpreted what I saw. An engine, a splash, even wind picking up. But nothing happened. The ocean kept rolling in quiet, steady waves. I started backing up the beach, not turning around yet, just putting distance between myself and the shoreline. I didn't have a clear thought in my head. It was like my mind refused to form one. I just knew I didn't want to be close to the water anymore. After maybe 20 steps, I finally turned and headed toward the dune path back to the cabin. I didn't run, but I walked fast enough that my sandals slapped in my hand. Every few seconds, I glanced over my shoulder at the ocean, half expecting another light to rise back up. Nothing did. When I reached the start of the dune grass, the air pressure shifted, subtle but noticeable, like when an elevator starts moving. My ears didn't pop exactly, but they felt full for a moment. I stopped walking and listened. Behind me, the waves paused. They didn't stop entirely, but the rhythm changed. Instead of the normal crash hiss pattern, there was a long stretch where the water didn't break at all. Just a dragging, low sound like the ocean had exhaled and was waiting to inhale again. I crouched down a little, instinctively, trying to make myself smaller. The dune grass rustled lightly, even though there was no wind. I looked back toward the shoreline. For a moment, the water looked too smooth, like a sheet of dark glass broken only by the faint moonlight. Then the usual waves started again, as if the ocean had remembered what it was supposed to be doing. I didn't wait around. I walked the rest of the way up the sandy path to Evan's cabin. Inside, everything felt wrong. Not in a supernatural way, just like I wasn't supposed to be awake. I checked the clock on the microwave, and the time didn't match the one on my phone. The phone said 11:43 p.m. The microwave said 11:58 p.m. I figured the power must have blinked recently, but the clocks in the bedroom and bathroom both matched the microwave. My phone was the only thing on the earlier time. I checked the battery graph to see if it had restarted, but it hadn't. It was acting like nothing happened. I sat in the kitchen chair near the window with the lights off, listening to the distant sound of the surf. It was back to normal, steady and rhythmic, but every few minutes it would slow for just one wave, just slightly off pattern before smoothing out again. That off-pattern wave happened all night. I stayed awake until sunrise, which felt like the only point when everything completely returned to normal. Even the clocks seemed synced again when I checked them. The next night, I didn't go near the beach. I sat on the porch instead, listening. The waves were normal. The sky was dark. No lights offshore. But every so often I'd get this feeling, like something had surfaced briefly, looked around, and gone back under before anyone could notice. I only stayed at the cabin one more day. Evan asked if everything was fine. I told him, yeah, everything was fine. I didn't tell him about the lights. I was out walking my dog, Penny, a little after 9 p.m. We'd gotten a late start because I'd been on a video call with my sister. And by the time I remembered Penny hadn't gone out, she was pacing by the door. It was one of those early winter nights in Brookfield where the air smelled like wet leaves and the temperature hovered just above freezing. A low ceiling of clouds blocked most of the sky, but the moonlight still seeped through in a dull, hazy way. My street is quiet even during the day, but at night it feels almost hollow. A single row of old sodium streetlights lines the sidewalk, spaced far enough apart that each cone of yellow light barely touches the next. Penny didn't seem bothered by the cold. She trotted ahead of me on her leash, nose down, tail swishing. The first strange thing happened about a block from my house. As we approached the next streetlight, it flickered once, hard, like it was losing power, and then snapped off completely. That wasn't new. They'd been doing that for months. The city kept promising to replace them. I remember rolling my eyes and muttering something about the electric grid. But then the next streetlight turned off, and the one after that. Not flickering, not dimming. They shut off in sequence, each one going dark just before we reached it. Penny froze. Her nails scraped lightly on the pavement as she planted her feet and stared straight down the street. I tugged the leash gently, but she wouldn't move. Her ears were forward, rigid, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Come on," I whispered, even though nobody was around. My breath clouded in the air. The dark felt heavier than it should have, like someone had draped a heavy blanket over the block. I glanced behind me. The streetlights we'd already passed were still on, glowing normally. Only the ones ahead had gone dark. I tried again to coax Penny forward. She took a hesitant step, then another, but her body stayed low to the ground. She kept sniffing at nothing, as if the air itself had changed. We reached the next intersection, which was lit by a single lamp near an old oak tree. As soon as we crossed under it, it went out. The sound it made, a faint metallic click, echoed louder than it should have. That was when I noticed the clouds shifting above us, not in a wind-driven way, but in slow gliding motions, like something large was drifting behind them. The movement wasn't natural. Clouds don't slide sideways all at once. I stared up at them, instinctively tightening my grip on the leash. Penny whimpered, low in her throat. Then I saw the glow. A pale, diffuse light, almost the color of frost on glass, moved silently between the clouds. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the street, but it made the edges of the clouds shimmer in a soft, eerie way. The light wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. No beam, no spotlight, no hint of a structure behind it. Just a drifting glow that looked like it shouldn't exist. My first thought was that maybe a helicopter was overhead, but there was no sound. Not even the distant hum you usually hear before or after one passes. The light also moved too smoothly, like it was underwater. I realized then that all the streetlights around me, every single one, had gone off. Not just the ones ahead. Even the ones behind had shut down while I wasn't paying attention. The entire block was dark except for the faint washed-out shimmer of that glow above the clouds. I crouched beside Penny, trying to calm her, but she wasn't responding. She was staring straight up, body trembling, tail tucked so far between her legs I could barely see it. I'd never seen her like that. And then the air pressure changed. It wasn't a gust of wind. There was no movement of air. It was a feeling, like stepping into an elevator that starts going up before you notice. My ears prickled, then felt full, like they wanted to pop. Penny whined and pressed her head against my knee. The glow slowed, not stopped, just slowed, as if whoever or whatever was moving it had noticed us. For a second I thought about calling someone, my sister maybe, but the idea felt ridiculous. Even if I did, what would I say? That the streetlights were turning off in front of me? That something was sliding through the clouds like a giant quiet fish? Besides, my phone's screen wouldn't unlock. I tried tapping it, holding the button, even hitting it against my palm. Nothing happened. The screen stayed black, but not dead, more like it wasn't receiving input. I shoved it back into my pocket and stood, gripping Penny's leash with both hands. The glow shifted again, not closer but wider somehow. The cloud edges thinned, revealing a vague circular shape of dim light that pulsed once, soft enough that I wondered if my eyes were just adjusting. Then everything stopped. The air pressure eased suddenly. The clouds stilled. Penny lifted her head and sniffed the air, shaky but calmer. The glow vanished behind the clouds, dissolving like it had never been there. A second passed, long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the streetlights flicked back on. All of them. In the exact same order they'd gone off. One by one, stretching down the block like someone was flipping switches from a distance. Penny bolted toward home, nearly pulling me off my feet. I didn't stop her. I jogged behind, my steps slapping against the pavement louder than usual in the newly returned light. By the time we reached my street, everything looked normal again. Cars parked the same way, houses dark except for a few bedroom windows, no sign that anything had happened. Penny ran straight to the front door and pawed at it until I fumbled the key and let her inside. I locked the door automatically, even though I never usually locked it until I went to bed. Penny hid behind the couch, something she hadn't done since she was a puppy. I checked my phone again. The screen lit up immediately. The time read 9:24 p.m. It had felt much longer than that. The next morning, I walked the same route just to reassure myself. All the streetlights were functioning. No flickers, no strange hums, nothing unusual about the sky. But when I passed the intersection, where the glow had been overhead, Penny stopped again. She didn't growl or bark. She just stared up quietly, her ears pulled back in a tense, uncertain way. I followed her gaze. The clouds were normal. The sky was pale blue. There was nothing out of place. But I still felt that same pressure in my ears, just for a second, like an echo of the night before. I hurried home. Penny didn't need coaxing. I still walk her at night, but never that route. And whenever I see even the faintest flicker from a streetlight, I feel myself tense up, waiting for the rest to go dark in sequence, waiting for that pale glow to drift behind the clouds again. So far, it hasn't. I woke up before my alarm, which almost never happens. It wasn't a sudden jolt or a nightmare, just that quiet, uneasy kind of waking, where your mind surfaces slowly, but your body feels like it's been on alert for a while. The first thing I noticed was the room felt different. Not brighter, not louder, just changed. The air felt warm on one side of me, like the window had been letting in heat, which didn't make sense because it was mid-November and the nights had been cold enough to frost the edges of the glass. I rolled over and saw the blinds near the window were open by maybe 2 or 3 inches. I always close them, every night. I've been like that since I moved into the apartment in Larchwood. The window faces a parking lot shared with the building next door, and I don't like waking up to headlights or morning brightness. Closing them is almost muscle memory at this point, but now they were open just enough to create a thin slice of visibility. And the air coming from that gap was warm, not hot, not uncomfortable, but wrong for the season and wrong for 4:30 in the morning. I sat up slowly, listening. The apartment was silent. The fridge had its usual hum. The upstairs neighbor wasn't moving around, and I didn't hear any cars outside. It was that deep, early morning quiet where even your breathing sounds too loud. I swung my legs off the bed and started walking toward the window. The floor felt normal, cold, the way laminate gets overnight. But the closer I got to the window, the warmer the air became. Not like a heater. The warmth was uneven, drifting, almost like standing near a sidewalk after a hot day. I put my hand near the blinds without touching them. The air on my palm felt like someone had been holding something warm right outside the glass minutes earlier. Not hot enough to leave a mark, but unmistakably warm. I pulled the blinds open another inch. The parking lot looked totally normal. One street lamp flickered the way it always did. A single car was parked under it. Same blue sedan I'd seen for weeks that belonged to a guy 2 doors down. Nothing else. No movement. The sky was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn gray blue that doesn't show any detail. I pressed my hand lightly to the window. The glass was cool, not warm at all. Whatever heat I'd felt wasn't coming from the outside air. I stepped back and just stood there for a while, trying to understand why I'd woken up at that exact moment. It didn't feel random. I checked my phone on the nightstand. 4:41 a.m. No notifications. Battery at 82%, same as when I'd plugged it in before bed. I decided to get a drink of water and maybe try to sleep again. But when I walked out of the bedroom, I noticed something else. The hallway light, which I never use, was on. Dim, but definitely on. I couldn't remember turning it on at any point. I'm careful about stuff like that because the landlord is big on electricity use. I flipped it off and went to the kitchen. The sink faucet felt slightly warm when I turned it on, even though I hadn't used hot water recently. I tried to tell myself it was just leftover warmth from the pipes, but I knew that didn't make sense. The water heater isn't even on that side of the apartment. I stood there drinking water and feeling more awake, but in a way that made my skin feel too sensitive, like every sound and shift of air mattered. When I walked back toward the bedroom, I saw the light from the hallway creeping under the door, except I had just shut that light off. I pushed the door open, heart racing a bit, and saw it immediately. The blinds were now open another inch. I hadn't touched them since earlier, I was sure of it. I went straight to the window again, moving faster this time. The warm air was gone. The room felt cooler than before, almost normal. The blinds were open just enough that I could see the empty lot again. I leaned in close, trying to find some explanation. Draft, warped frame, something. But the blinds felt stiff. They didn't slide easily. There was no way they could open on their own without making noise. I tugged them up and down a bit just to check, and they squealed like they always did. No way that motion happened quietly in the middle of the night. I lowered them again and made sure they were fully closed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. My heartbeat was still uneven, but not in a panicked way. More like when you're bracing for something you can't define. I lay back down and pulled the covers over myself, though I kept my eyes open for maybe 20 minutes, staring at the small outline of the window in the dark. Nothing moved. The room stayed cool. Eventually, I must have drifted back to sleep, because the next thing I remember was my alarm going off at 7:30. Morning light filtered softly through the blinds, still fully closed, exactly how I left them. For a moment, I wondered if the whole thing had been a dream, but when I got up to open the blinds, I felt it again. The faintest trace of warmth lingering just at the edge of the frame, as if it had soaked into the air. It faded within seconds, but I felt it. That was enough. I stayed by the window for a while, looking out at the lot, the street lamp still flickering in daylight, the blue sedan still sitting in its spot. Everything looked exactly the same as always, except the inside of my apartment didn't feel the same at all. Every night since then, I've closed the blinds carefully, making sure the slats line up perfectly, tugging the cord to lock them in place. And every morning, the first thing I do is check them. So far, they've stayed shut. But sometimes when I wake up before the alarm, I still feel that faint warmth in the air, just enough to let me know it wasn't the blinds that mattered. It was whatever was behind them. I was driving back from my cousin Mark's place in Clearwater, taking the old two-lane road that winds through the foothills. It was close to 11 at night in early October, the kind of night where everything feels colder than it should because the air is so dry. I'd taken that route plenty of times, but usually during the day. At night, it felt different, emptier, like the darkness was heavier between the pines. There were no other cars out. I hadn't passed one in almost 20 minutes. The road has hardly any reflectors, so the only thing breaking up the dark were my own headlights, throwing long beams across the asphalt and catching the occasional road sign or fence post. About 5 miles from the Clearwater cutoff, I came around a bend where the road straightens out for a while. That's when it happened. My headlights flickered off something above the road, not ahead, not off to the side, but high up, like 30 or 40 feet. A quick flash, the way light hits metal for just a moment. I slowed down without meaning to, squinting at the sky. It wasn't an airplane, there were no blinking navigation lights, and it wasn't moving like one. It wasn't a helicopter either. No sound, no downward beam, nothing. Just a brief, shining reflection. I kept rolling forward, maybe 20 miles an hour, trying to spot it again. My heart had started beating harder, like though I didn't feel scared yet. Just unsettled, like I'd caught something that shouldn't have been there. Then I saw it. A metallic shape hovered above the road. Not a clear outline, more like a dark oval reflecting the faintest bit of my headlights. It was too far up for me to tell its exact size, but it was big enough that the reflection stretched across the edges. It wasn't spinning or drifting. It was just sitting there, angled slightly, like someone had hung a huge piece of smooth metal in the air and forgotten to tie it down. I braked harder. The car slowed to a crawl. The shape tilted, barely. Not like it was adjusting flight or fighting wind, more like it was responding to something. The movement was too smooth, too deliberate. I rolled down the window a crack, expecting to hear something, anything. A hum, rotors, an engine. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp, nothing. Just silence, except for my tires crunching over loose gravel at the road's edge. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, staring up through the windshield. The metallic surface caught my headlights again, but only for a split second, as if it had turned or shifted in a way that avoided the light. My stomach dropped. I didn't have a name for the feeling, but it was close to dread. Then it moved. Not sideways, not forward, straight up. It shot upward without accelerating. 1 second it was there, hovering, tilting slightly. The next it was climbing at a constant speed, so fast my eyes barely tracked it. No buildup, no blur, just immediate, impossible motion. By the time I blinked, it was already a faint shape against the sky. Then it was gone. The night sky looked completely normal again, just stars and a thin band of clouds off toward the mountains. My car idled in the middle of the road. I realized I'd been gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. I waited a few seconds, staring upward in case it came back or I'd imagined it. But the sky stayed empty. I kept driving, a little faster than I meant to, checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary. The road looked the same as it always had, but everything felt wrong, like the air itself had changed texture. Even my headlights seemed dimmer, though I knew they weren't. About a mile later, the radio popped, just a single burst of static, before going back to normal. The station didn't change, the volume didn't shift, just that one sharp crackle as if someone flicked a switch somewhere. I turned the radio off completely. Another mile passed. The trees thickened on both sides, leaning over the road. The darkness felt heavier there. My shoulders were tight, and every time I drove under a break in the branches, I found myself looking up automatically. At one point, I pulled over near a turnout, thinking maybe I should collect myself before continuing. I put the car in park, turned off the headlights, and sat there in the near dark. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled, and for a minute, I just listened. Then the forest went quiet. It wasn't loud to begin with, but there's always something. Wind, insects, creaking branches. It all shut off at once, the same way someone closes a door. The air pressure felt heavier, like before a storm, except there were no clouds. I rolled the window down again, half expecting to see the metallic shape above the trees. Nothing. The forest slowly came back to life. First a faint rustle, then the wind picking up again. The pressure eased out of my ears. Everything returned to normal so smoothly I almost doubted the silence had happened at all. I put the car back in drive. The rest of the trip felt like walking through a house you know is empty, but still feel compelled to check every corner. I kept my eyes on the trees, the sky, the edges of my high beams. My pulse finally stopped racing when I hit the first stretch of houses on the outskirts of Clearwater. When I got home, I sat in the driveway longer than necessary. The sky above my house looked normal. No strange reflections, no metallic shapes, but I still hesitated before getting out of the car, like stepping into open space made me vulnerable again. Inside, everything was as I left it. Warm air, porch light on, fridge hum in the background. But when I went to wash my face in the bathroom, I noticed something odd. My reflection looked tired, but not as tired as I felt. Almost like I'd missed a moment, like some tiny sliver of the drive wasn't accounted for in my memory. Not a big gap, just a skipped beat somewhere around when the radio popped. I didn't think about it too hard. I didn't want to. I tried to sleep, but every time a car passed outside and its headlights swept across my bedroom ceiling, my heart jumped. I haven't taken that road at night since. And sometimes when I'm driving anywhere and my headlights hit something reflective in a strange way, I feel myself tense up, waiting for a shape to tilt above me, waiting for something to shoot upward in a motion that makes no sense at all. So far, I haven't seen it again. I had gone out to the field behind my apartment complex because it was one of those rare nights in Glenford where the sky was actually clear. No haze, no light pollution drifting in from the strip mall a mile away. It was a crisp, early April night, just cold enough that I kept my hands in my hoodie pockets between checking my phone and adjusting the little folding stool I'd brought with me. I wasn't a real stargazer. I didn't know constellations beyond the obvious ones. I just liked looking up when the weather cooperated. It made the town feel bigger than it was. I remember lying back on the grass, phone face down beside me, the smell of damp soil bleeding through the cold. A couple of dogs barked in the distance, and a train horn carried faintly from the south. The sky was so clear I could actually see satellites drifting in steady, predictable lines. Tiny dots moving slowly, not interesting, but calming somehow. Then one star caught my attention. It was brighter than the others. Not flashing or twinkling in a weird way, just brighter, sharp-edged, almost white instead of the softer yellow most of the stars had. At first, I thought it was Venus, but it was in the wrong part of the sky for that. I watched it without really thinking about why. It didn't look out of place, just more noticeable than anything else around it. After maybe 20 seconds, it moved. Not like a satellite. Not like a plane. It slid to the right in a perfectly straight line, paused for a beat, then moved upward. Same speed, same clean motion. Then left. Then down. A square. A perfect square. I sat up fast enough that the grass stuck to the back of my hoodie. I kept staring, waiting for it to zigzag or drift or do anything that made sense. But it kept tracing that square, one side at a time, pausing slightly at each corner like it was hitting marks on a grid. The motion wasn't jumpy, it was smooth, mechanical, but too sharp to be anything drifting naturally. My first thought was drone, some kind of high-altitude drone or a plane reflecting something weird. But it didn't blink, didn't make sound, didn't wobble. It was so steady it felt unnatural. I reached for my phone to turn on the camera. The instant I focused on the star, really focused, squinting to center it, it froze, just stopped. It didn't slow to a stop. It went from motion to stillness like someone had hit pause. I lowered the phone slightly and glanced away, as if looking straight at it had somehow affected it. Still frozen. The star sat there like it had never moved. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe I imagined the motion. Maybe my eyes tracked something else. But my heartbeat had already hit that tight, fast rhythm I get when something is seriously wrong. I lifted the phone again, this time planning to film anyway, even if nothing happened. Before I could open the camera, the air shifted. A light breeze came through the field, cool and dry, but it felt deliberate. It stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only a subtle pressure in my ears, like when a cabin changes altitude on a plane. The star flickered, not dimming, flickering, like something passed in front of it. Then it brightened for a split second, not enough to light up anything around it, just enough that I felt the intensity hit my eyes. And then it moved again. But not in a square this time. It zipped upward so fast I almost missed it. Then it stopped dead, then zipped left, stopped again. Each motion was immediate, no acceleration, no curve, just instant speed and instant stillness. I felt a weird drop in my stomach, the way you feel when you miss a step going downstairs. It wasn't fear exactly, more like disbelief trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The field around me felt too quiet. I realized I couldn't hear the dogs anymore. Couldn't hear the train or the wind, or even the distant hum of traffic from the highway. It was silence in a way the outdoors never truly is. I stood up slowly, not wanting to make noise, even though there wasn't any to make. The grass brushed against my shoes, but even that sound felt muted. The star, if that's what it was, slid downward a few degrees, then stopped, then it slid right, then up again, same perfect lines as before. I looked around the field, half expecting someone to be nearby with a laser or some kind of projection device, but I was alone. Every apartment window behind me was dark. I made myself look back at the sky. The star was gone, not faded, not drifted, just gone. One moment it was there, the next my eyes were staring at an empty patch of sky. Then something else appeared. Not a light, more like a dim patch, a soft blur against the darkness. Almost like the glow left over when you close your eyes after staring at something bright. It wasn't moving at first, but it pulsed once, then stretched a little, then faded upward as if being erased. I stood there frozen, hands numb even though the air wasn't that cold. Then the sounds returned all at once. The wind, distant traffic, a single dog bark. The sudden noise made my body jolt like I'd been startled awake. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I stayed in the field another minute or two, scanning the sky, feeling the uneven beat of my pulse. The stars looked completely normal again. Satellites drifted the way they always do. Nothing else moved. Nothing else moved. When I picked up my phone, the screen lit instantly, but the camera app didn't open the first time I tapped it, or the second. Only on the third try did it finally load, and by then the sky was just sky. I walked home slowly, checking behind me even though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The field felt smaller now, like the sky had closed in somehow. Inside my apartment, I locked the door without thinking and sat by the window, peeking through the blinds at the sky. Everything seemed calm, normal, familiar. But when I tried to find the bright star again, the one that had moved, it wasn't there. The spot where I'd seen it was empty. I stayed awake another hour, watching. Nothing happened, but every so often, my eyes would catch a faint flicker near the edge of my vision, and my breath would catch, just for a second, like maybe it was out there still. Just not moving unless I wasn't looking directly at it. I only saw the notification the next morning. My security camera app sent me an alert around 2:14 a.m., but I'd been asleep and didn't check it until I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. I remember rubbing my eyes, half awake, and tapping the thumbnail expecting to see a raccoon or maybe a stray cat. My backyard isn't fenced well, and animals wander through all the time. But instead of the usual clip, there was just a 2-second video of pure white. Not bright like a flashlight, not blown out like a glitch. It was a single solid wash of white that filled the entire frame, yard, porch, trees, everything gone. I checked the timeline bar under the clip, expecting it to be corrupted, but something else was wrong. The time jumped. The clip started at 2:14:06 a.m., it ended at 2:14:06 a.m., and the next video started at 2:13 a.m. 7 seconds missing. At first I figured maybe the camera hiccuped. It's a cheap model, and the Wi-Fi in my house cuts out sometimes. But when I stepped to the back door and looked outside, something felt off. The grass looked damp even though it hadn't rained. The air felt still and warm, like the oven had been on. And the birds, which normally scream their heads off at dawn, were quiet. I told myself I was overthinking it. I forced myself to drink coffee, feed the dog, and get ready for work. But I kept checking the camera feed on my phone, scrubbing back and forth between 2:14:06 and 2:13, like I had missed something. Nothing. Just the same blank flash and a dead gap. That night, around 10, I decided to sit up and watch the yard live. I wasn't expecting anything. Mostly, I wanted to prove to myself that nothing weird was happening. I turned on the porch light and left the curtains open just a couple inches so I could see the window from the couch. By midnight, I was bored. I muted the TV and listened for anything outside, but the only sound was the refrigerator humming. I checked the yard again. Nothing. Just still grass and the faint pool of porch light. Around 1:40, I nodded off. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember jerking awake suddenly, like someone whispered something too close to my ear. The house was dark, except for the porch light seeping in through the window crack. My phone screen was lit up on the coffee table. Another motion alert. My heart started pounding because I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps on the deck, no rustling. I reached for the phone with that weird, shaky hesitation you get when you're not sure you want to see what's on the screen. The thumbnail was white again. I tapped it. Same thing as the night before, a burst of white filling the whole frame. But this time it lasted longer, 3 seconds instead of 2, and the timestamp jumped again, this time by 9 seconds. I checked the live feed. The yard looked normal, totally normal. Porch light on, fence in the back catching the glow, nothing moving. But the air in the house felt different, heavy like before a storm, except the forecast was clear. Even the dog, who normally sleeps through everything, was standing in the hallway staring toward the back door with her ears pinned flat. I turned off the TV and walked to the window. The moment I touched the curtain, the outside world felt wrong. Not visually. Everything looked the same, but the atmosphere felt stale, like the air hadn't moved in hours. I unlocked the back door and stepped onto the porch. The warmth hit first. The night had been cool earlier, but now it felt like walking into a room that had been shut for too long. The yard smelled faintly metallic, like hot wires or distant fireworks. I crouched to touch the grass near the steps. Warm. Not damp this time. Warm. No obvious reason for it. I stood there for a while, listening. The sound, or lack of sound, was the same as the morning. No insects, no wind, no distant cars, just dead quiet. Even the dog refused to follow me outside. She stood at the threshold, whining softly. I backed into the house and shut the door, but didn't lock it. I needed my hands free. I pulled up the camera feed again on my phone. The live view glitched. Just a flicker, like static, but enough to show a frame where the backyard looked darker than it should. The porch light was on, but for one split second, the yard was dim, like something passed in front of the camera. Then it returned to normal. I stayed awake until almost 3, checking the feed every few minutes. Nothing else happened. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I noticed a thin strip of grass near the far end of the yard was flattened. Not trampled, just pressed down in a long, straight line, maybe 20 feet long. No footprints. No wheel marks. Just a smooth depression like something heavy had hovered low enough to push the grass down without touching it. I took pictures, though I didn't know who I'd show them to. Before leaving for work, I checked the camera footage again. No new alerts. But I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. Between the white flash and the next video, a single frame existed at the end of the corrupted clip. A gray shape, just for a fraction of a second. Not a figure, not an animal. More like the bottom curve of something smooth and bright, like metal catching light. The frame was too blurry to identify anything, but it wasn't there the night before. Or maybe I hadn't noticed it. That was 2 weeks ago. Nothing else has happened since, not visibly. But the security camera skips sometimes, random jumps of 1 or 2 seconds, and every time it does, I check the yard. And every morning before I leave for work, I walk across the grass to see if a new strip has been pressed down. So far, none have. But sometimes at around 2 in the morning, the dog lifts her head, ears twitching, like she hears something outside before I do. And every time she does that, I look at the clock and wait to see if the camera will send another alert. Another burst of impossible white washing out the whole world for a few seconds I'll never get back. I heard the humming before I was fully awake. It wasn't loud, more like a deep vibration that seemed to come from the walls or maybe from inside my own chest. I remember lying there for a few seconds trying to figure out if it was part of a dream, but the sound didn't fade the way dreams usually do. It stayed steady, low, even, like a giant electric motor running somewhere overhead. My first thought was that the HVAC unit on the roof of the building had kicked on, but I live in a single-story house in Brookdale. There's nothing on the roof except shingles and a vent pipe. No reason anything should be humming. I sat up slowly. The vibration didn't change. It pulsed faintly through my ribs, like standing next to a big subwoofer. Even breathing felt strange, like the air was thicker than usual. The clock on my nightstand said 2:27 a.m. I listened harder, waiting for another sign of what it could be. A plane? A neighbor's generator? A transformer 2 streets over? But there was no mechanical clatter, no Doppler shift, no rhythmic chug of anything natural or man-made. Just that low, chest-deep hum, steady as a heartbeat. The house felt too still. No creaking, no wind, no passing cars outside. I didn't even hear insects, which was strange for my neighborhood. It all felt muted under that vibrating sound. I got out of bed and walked toward the hallway. The vibration got stronger as I moved through the house, especially near the living room, like the sound was more concentrated toward the front of the house. The windows weren't rattling, but they felt tense, almost like pressure was building on one side. I hesitated at the front door, hand hovering over the deadbolt. Some part of me expected something to knock back if I touched it. The hum kept going, drone-like but almost too smooth, too even. Nothing that's steady comes from anything normal. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. The hum stopped instantly. Not faded, not lowered. Stopped, like someone had cut a wire. The sudden silence made my ears ring. I stood there with the door halfway open, waiting to hear it start again, but there was nothing. The air outside was cool, still, and completely quiet. I stepped onto the porch. The neighborhood looked normal. Streetlights glowing, parked cars lined up along the curb. A sprinkler ran somewhere down the block, soft, rhythmic clicking. The sky was cloudless and dark, just a scattering of stars above the rooftops. No aircraft, no drones, no flickering lights, no shadows moving across the street, and absolutely no hum. I walked down the first 2 steps and scanned the sky directly above my house. It felt almost stupid doing it, standing there barefoot in pajama bottoms at 2:30, staring upward like I was expecting something to be hovering over me. But after hearing that vibration through my ribs, I needed to check. Nothing. Just empty sky. But the air felt wrong. Not warm, not cold. Just off. Thick in a way I couldn't explain, like the atmosphere had been stirred a few seconds earlier and was settling back into place. I stood there for a full minute, waiting to hear any sign of the hum returning. It didn't. Instead, the neighborhood sounds slowly came back. A car in the distance, the rustle of leaves, a dog barking 2 streets over. I finally went back inside and locked the door behind me. My chest still buzzed faintly, like the vibration had left something behind. I took a few deep breaths to shake it off, but the sensation hung on longer than the noise had. I walked from room to room just to reassure myself everything was normal. The house felt unchanged. No lights were on that shouldn't be. Nothing had fallen. The thermostat showed the same temperature as before. The only thing that stood out was the silence inside. It wasn't total, but it felt heavy, like the walls had absorbed the leftover vibration and were still settling from it. I lay back down eventually, though I kept the light on. I didn't fall asleep until nearly 4. The next morning, I checked around the house in daylight. The roof was fine, no loose shingles, no fallen branches. The vents were all intact. The attic was empty, except for insulation and old holiday decorations. Nothing that could hum or vibrate. My neighbor, Mrs. Adler, was outside watering her garden, so I asked if she'd heard anything during the night. She shook her head and said she'd slept straight through. When I mentioned a humming sound, she said, like the power lines buzzing, and pointed toward the poles, but the lines were normal. And the sound I heard wasn't like that anyway. It didn't come through the air, it came through me. Before I left for work, I opened the front door again and stood on the porch, listening. Morning traffic was picking up, birds were loud, everything seemed normal, but the air still felt a little heavy, like residue from something that had been there before. That night, I went to bed later than usual. I kept the hallway light on. I wasn't exactly expecting the hum to return, but I also wasn't ruling it out. I fell asleep eventually, and sometime around the early morning hours, maybe 3, maybe 4, I woke up suddenly. Not to a noise, not to a vibration, just the feeling that something had woken me. I listened hard, ears straining for any sound above the house, any faint droning or chest-deep hum. The room was quiet. The air was normal. My chest felt still. I waited in the dark for a long time, maybe half an hour, but the hum didn't come back. Not that night, anyway. Still, every time the house settles, every time I hear distant machinery, every time something buzzes faintly against my ribs for no reason at all, I remember standing on the porch in the middle of the night, the way everything fell silent the exact moment I stepped outside, like something that had been right above me had pulled away just fast enough not to be seen. And I wonder if it's going to return. I saw the lights as soon as I turned onto County Road 6. The fog was thick that night, early spring, cool enough that the fields were still holding the damp from the day. My headlights just pushed a tunnel through it, and everything past that looked like blanker white walls. I'd driven that road plenty of times after late shifts, but I was going slower than usual because the fog made the asphalt shine like it was wet even though it wasn't. The floating headlights showed up maybe a quarter mile ahead. 2 pale circles spaced the way a car's would be, except they were too high. Not by much, just a couple feet higher than any truck I'd expect on that road, but enough that I noticed. They didn't glare, they didn't move, they just hovered there in the fog, steady and white. At first I thought it was a pickup on a rise in the road, maybe turning onto a driveway. I eased off the gas and kept watching them. The weird thing was that they stayed perfectly still. No slight bounce or shift like you'd expect from a running engine or a driver adjusting position. And no taillights, which I should have seen if I was actually looking at the back of a vehicle. I slowed to maybe 20. The lights didn't brighten or dim. The fog swirled around them but never crossed through them, like it was sliding around a solid shape I couldn't see. I started to get this prickling feeling in my arms, like the air around me was cooler than inside the car. My heater was on, so that didn't make sense. The fog ahead looked thicker every second, almost like it was collapsing inward around those lights. I kept driving toward them, telling myself it had to be a trick of the fog, headlights reflecting off moisture, a car cresting a hill. Something simple. But as I closed the distance, the lights didn't get any clearer. They stayed fuzzy, like staring at reflections in water. My windshield fogged around the edges even though the defroster was on full blast. The engine sounded quieter than it should have, another thing I didn't like noticing. I gripped the wheel tighter and leaned forward a bit, trying to make out a grill, a hood, anything. I must have blinked or looked down for half a second at the speedometer. And when I looked up again, the lights were gone. Not faded, not moved. Gone, like someone flipped a switch. The fog thinned at that exact moment, like something had been holding it in place. The road stretched out empty ahead of me, faintly lit by my own headlights and nothing else. No cars, no driveways, no hills big enough to hide anything behind. I let the car roll to a stop in the middle of the lane. The quiet felt too sudden. Even the sound of the engine idling felt distant. I listened for another car, for any sign that someone had been there a second earlier. Nothing. I cracked the window to hear better, and the cold air felt heavy. Not windy or sharp, just heavy, like it was being pushed down somehow. The fog kept thinning until I could see the fields on either side of the road, pale and empty. I sat there maybe a minute, trying to decide what I was actually seeing. Part of me wanted to get out and look around, check for skid marks or a driveway I'd missed. But something about the silence made me stay inside. The interior of the car suddenly felt too open, like someone could be standing just outside the frame of my headlights if I stepped out. Instead, I put the car back in gear and drove forward slowly. I kept checking my mirrors even though visibility back there was worse. The fog behind me looked normal, patchy, uneven, drifting. Nothing like what had been sitting in front of me. After maybe another mile, the fog thinned out entirely. The sky above the road was clear enough to see a faint line of stars. I didn't realize how tense I'd been until my hands started to hurt from gripping the wheel. I took a few deep breaths, told myself it had been headlights from a truck on a slope I didn't notice. The road does dip and rise a lot out there, but no matter how I tried to replay it, I couldn't picture where a vehicle could have gone in that instant. There were no turnoffs for a good mile in either direction. I kept driving, but something felt wrong with the radio. It was on, but I didn't remember turning it down as low as it was. I turned the volume knob and nothing changed. I switched stations. Nothing. Just a faint hiss, like weak reception, even though that road normally gets every station. I turned it off. A few minutes later, the fog reappeared. Not as thick as before, just wisps crossing the road. I tried not to tense up again, but it was hard not to. Every patch of fog looked like it might hide something. Around a long curve, my headlights flashed briefly off something reflective in the ditch. I hit the brakes automatically. When the car stopped, the reflective bit was gone, nothing but grass and a fence line. I stayed there with the hazard lights ticking away, trying to keep my breathing steady. I didn't like how alert I felt, like my body was listening for something I couldn't consciously hear. The fog around the car shifted slightly, and for a second I thought I saw two faint, circular shapes farther down the road. By the time I blinked, they were gone. I forced myself to keep going. I didn't want to sit still long enough for anything else to show up. The road home is straight for the last 2 miles, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see lights behind me. Nothing. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt drained. My house looked too dark, like even the porch light was dimmer than usual. I sat in the car with the engine running for a moment, trying to decide whether the fog smell clinging to my clothes was normal. When I finally went inside, the first thing I did was stand at the living room window and look out at the yard. Not because I expected to see anything, just because part of me needed to. It was quiet. No fog. No lights. I told myself it was overthinking. Fog does weird things to headlights. Light refracts in ways that can make simple things look strange. Maybe another car had turned onto a hidden farm road. I brushed my teeth, changed into clean clothes, and checked my phone before bed. That's when I noticed something I hadn't expected. My phone's clock said 12:58 a.m., but the drive should have taken 40 minutes, and I'd left work at a little after midnight. 12:12 or 12:13, I think. I checked my car dash clock. Same time. I checked the microwave, the stove. All the clocks agreed. The timing didn't make sense. I tried to work out the minutes, where they'd gone. Maybe I'd sat longer on the side of the road than it felt like. Maybe I'd misremembered when I left work. But none of it clicked neatly together. I went to bed eventually. The house sounded normal. Everything settled too quickly. But sometimes when I think about it, I can still see those floating headlights, hanging too still, too high, too perfectly spaced, and the way the fog seemed to thin only after they disappeared, like the road was returning to normal after something had been there that didn't belong to it. I was parked at the Ridgepoint Lookout a little after 11. I'd gone up there to clear my head after a long day. Nothing dramatic, just work stress and the usual noise in my brain. That spot has a view of the whole valley, and at night you can see the town lights scattered way below, like tiny reflections. I left the engine off and cracked the window to let the cold air in. I wasn't tired yet. I had music playing low on my phone, just enough to keep the quiet from feeling too heavy. The wind was barely noticeable, just the occasional push against the car that felt normal for being on a ridge. Then the car moved in a way that wasn't normal. It wasn't a strong shake. It felt more like a single heavy nudge, just one. Like someone put their hand on the back bumper and pressed down once, firm enough that the suspension shifted under me. I felt it through the seat, and I ended up grabbing the steering wheel without thinking. The first thing I did was check the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone walking up, maybe another car pulling in next to me. But the lot was empty. Even the gravel around me was still. No animals, no headlights, no shadows moving. I turned off the music. The quiet after that felt too sudden. Another gust of wind never came. The air felt waiting, I guess, like the moment right before a storm hits, though the sky earlier had been totally clear. I leaned and looked out the side window toward the forest edge behind the lot. Nothing moved there either. No trees shaking, no branches falling. I opened the door a crack and listened. No footsteps, no engine starting somewhere down the road. Just silence that didn't feel natural. Then something overhead caught my eye. It wasn't bright. If anything, the light looked muted, like the glow of a phone screen under a blanket. A dim, pale shape slid across the sky just above the viewpoint, moving in a straight, steady line. Not fast, not slow, just too smooth. At first I thought it was a plane, but the light wasn't blinking, and there was no engine noise at all. Ridgepoint is usually quiet enough that you can hear a prop plane miles away, but this thing was silent. Completely silent. I stepped out of the car without really intending to. The air outside felt colder than it had been a few minutes earlier. Or maybe it was just me. The gravel under my shoes crunched way too loudly, like my hearing had adjusted to how quiet everything was. The light overhead wasn't circular or sharp-edged. It was more of an oval glow, maybe the size of a small car held at arm's length if I had to guess. But the edges faded into the sky instead of staying defined. It drifted straight across the valley, unbothered by the wind that usually hit the ridge. I walked around to the front of my car, staring up, trying to figure out if it was a drone. Some of the bigger film drones have lights underneath, but they still make that buzzing noise. Even the quiet ones give off a hum. This thing didn't. The car behind me clicked once, just the metal contracting, but the timing made my stomach tighten. I glanced back to make sure nobody had approached it. Nobody had. When I looked up again, the dim light slowed. Not stopped, but slowed in a way that felt intentional. Like it was considering something, or maybe that was just how it seemed in the moment. The glow faded slightly, then brightened just a tiny bit. Not a pulse, not a blink, more like the clouds shifting around it, except there were no clouds. Something about its motion bothered me. It didn't bob or drift like a balloon. It didn't follow an arc like a satellite. It stayed level, gliding as if the air didn't affect it at all. I realized then that the forest below the lookout was perfectly still. No insects, no birds, no wind, just nothing. The light kept moving until it reached a point almost directly above the center of the valley. Then it dimmed, slowly, like someone lowering a dimmer switch, and continued fading until it blended with the night sky. I kept staring long after it disappeared. My eyes adjusted to the dark again, and the normal stars looked wrong somehow, like they were a little too sharp or too steady. I finally got back into the car. The interior felt warmer than it should have been after being open to the night air. I sat there with my hand on the ignition but didn't turn it yet. It took me a moment to realize something else was strange. The car clock said 11:52. I checked my phone, 11:46. I hadn't been watching the sky for 6 minutes. It felt like 2, maybe 3. I replayed everything mentally, trying to see where the extra time could have gone, if I'd been standing outside longer than I realized. But the cold on my skin and the stiffness in my legs didn't match 6 minutes of standing motionless. Eventually I started the car. The engine sounded normal, but the headlights flickered once when they came on, just for a split second. I chalked it up to the battery, even though it had never done that before. Driving down the ridge felt different than driving up. The road seemed narrower somehow, the trees leaning closer than I remembered. I kept catching myself checking the mirrors more than the road. At one point, I thought I saw another pale light move behind one of the hills, but by the time I blinked, it was gone. When I reached the base of the ridge, the sound of insects finally returned. It was faint at first, like the world was slowly unmuting. The bit of relief I felt didn't last long. The hum of crickets sounded too uniform, like they were all synced. I made it home around midnight. I sat in the driveway for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The neighborhood was quiet, but at least it was normal quiet. Windows lit, dogs barking down the block, cars passing occasionally. But when I got out of the car, I felt the tiniest vibration in the ground, like someone dropping something heavy far away. I told myself it was a truck hitting a pothole on the main road. In my living room, I kept replaying the moment the car rocked, the single firm shift of weight, like something large had moved past it. I imagined an animal, a person, even a gust of wind. None of it fit. I went to bed around 1, but sleep didn't come quickly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dim, silent light drifting over the valley as if it already knew the path it wanted to take. And the way it slowed, just slightly, just enough to notice when I stepped out of the car. I woke up because my room looked wrong. Not bright, but brighter than it should have been for how early it felt. I hadn't set an alarm. I didn't need one that day, so I reached over to check my phone for the time. When I picked it up, the screen didn't turn on. Completely dead. It had been at 100% when I went to bed. I remembered plugging it in and watching a video until the charger got warm against my leg. I even checked the charging icon before falling asleep. But now the battery was drained so fully, the phone didn't even vibrate when I tried the power button. At first, I assumed the cable had come loose. When I touched it, though, the metal tip was slightly warm, like it had been charging all night. That didn't make sense. The brightness coming through the blinds wasn't normal either. It wasn't sunlight, at least not full sunlight. It was more like the way the sky looks right before sunrise, except it didn't seem to be spreading. More like the whole sky was evenly lit, with no direction to it. I got out of bed and went to the window. The moment I pulled the blinds up, something felt off with the air inside the room, like pressure shifting in a plane cabin. A tiny pop in my ears. Outside, the sky was a dull, washed-out blue-gray. Too bright for maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, but not bright enough for actual day. The houses along Redwood Street were dark, except for a few porch lights running on timers. No birds, no early dog walkers, no cars passing the intersection the way they usually did around that hour. I looked up. There weren't any clouds, but the sky didn't look clear either. It looked flat, like the color was being projected onto it. The hairs on my arms lifted a little. I checked the time on the microwave, 4:18 a.m. That didn't match the brightness at all. On a normal morning, the sky wouldn't look like that for another 40 minutes at least. I knew because I usually woke up around sunrise for work. My ears popped again, just a tiny shifting sensation, almost like the house was adjusting around me. I went outside, partly to see the sky better, and partly because staying inside suddenly made me uncomfortable. The air outside was cool, but not cold, and still. Completely still. Normally, there's a breeze that comes off the small hill behind the neighborhood, but the trees behind my yard were stiff, not even a twitch of movement. I stepped into the yard and just stood there listening. Nothing. No insects, no birds, no hum of AC units, no distant traffic. Even the usual buzzing of the transformer at the end of the street seemed muted. The sky felt too bright above me, like a huge sheet of backlit paper. I cupped my hand over my eyes and looked higher, trying to catch any sign of the sunrise. Orange edges, pink streaks, anything. There was none. Just an even, faint glow coming from everywhere and nowhere. As I stood there, I realized the brightness wasn't increasing. It wasn't decreasing either. It was just holding steady, like the sky was stuck on one dim setting. Something flickered at the corner of my vision. I glanced toward it, toward the empty lot across from my yard. For a split second, the air above the ground shimmered, a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. But it was cold outside, and the shimmer wasn't anywhere near the road. It was hovering maybe 6 feet above the tall grass. Then it snapped away. Not faded. Snapped, like a film frame cutting to the next. I stood there a moment, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I blinked weird. Maybe my eyes weren't adjusted. I checked the yard for anything else unusual, but everything looked normal. My fence. The garden shed. The patch of dead grass near the back corner that I'd been meaning to reseed. All normal, except the silence. The silence was wrong. I finally walked back inside and tried turning my phone on again, out of habit. Still dead. I plugged it into the outlet near the kitchen table. Nothing. Not even the charging symbol. I tried a different cable. Still nothing. Both chargers worked the day before. I checked my watch, the old analog one I never wore anymore. It said 4:23. 5 minutes since I checked the microwave, it felt like 20. I went back to the window to see if the sky had changed. It hadn't. Same brightness, same flat color, like the sky wasn't a sky at all, but a dome with a light behind it. Then something happened that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. The light dimmed, just slightly, like someone slowly turned a dial from unsettling morning toward normal pre-dawn. The color shifted to something more familiar. I heard a bird, just one, somewhere down the street, chirp once. My ears popped again, more noticeably this time. And then the sky darkened back to what it should have been, just like that. The faint glow receded as though the sun had jumped backward in time. Stars appeared where there hadn't been any a second earlier, sharp and clear. A car passed on Maple Drive a block away. Its headlights cut across the cross street like normal. The world had snapped back into place. My phone vibrated suddenly on the counter. I ran to it. The screen lit up with the charging symbol, 14%, climbing like it had been plugged in for a while, even though it hadn't responded before. But the timestamp was strange, 4:24, exactly 1 minute after the moment the sky had returned to normal. I unplugged the phone and stepped outside again. Now everything was as it should be, the dark sky. The first hints of orange forming low on the horizon, birds starting their usual chorus from the trees. But the air still felt a little too still, like the world was recovering from something. I stood there another minute, waiting to see if anything else shifted. Nothing did. When I went back inside, the house felt less heavy, like the pressure had equalized somehow. I didn't check the sky again until actual sunrise, when everything looked normal enough to make me question the whole thing. But I didn't imagine the dead phone. And I didn't imagine that flat, impossible brightness, or the way the air shimmered above the empty lot, exactly at eye level, like something had been there watching before slipping away. I was out on the east side of Lake Merrow before dawn, sitting on the old wooden dock that belongs to my friend Luis's family. He lets me use it whenever I want, and I like going out before sunrise, mostly because nobody else is around at that hour. The water is usually calm, and the only sounds are distant frogs and the occasional splash from fish hitting the surface. That morning, the air felt colder than usual for early June. Not freezing, just sharper. There was a thin layer of mist drifting across the lake, close enough to the surface that it looked like someone had pulled a sheet of smoke over the water. The moon was behind me, low and fading, and the sky in front of me was still fully dark. I cast out once, twice, let the line sit. Nothing unusual. Then, and I noticed a faint brightness along the horizon, but only in one narrow section, like someone was shining a long-range flashlight from behind the hills. At first I thought it was just the first hint of sunrise. The timing was close enough, but the glow didn't spread. It stayed contained in one strip, no wider than an outstretched hand. It reminded me of a spotlight behind a curtain. The mist on the lake started to drift toward that spot, pulled almost imperceptibly like a breeze I couldn't feel was nudging it. I held my breath without meaning to, watching the way the glow nudged against the dark sky above it. It wasn't orange or pink. It was a pale, washed-out white that didn't look like any sunrise I'd seen. The glow brightened slightly, only slightly, like someone increasing a dimmer switch a notch, and instead of spreading outward along the horizon, it began retracting upward in a smooth vertical line. Not fast, almost graceful, if that makes sense. I felt a pressure shift in my ears as it moved. Not painful, just noticeable, like the air changing around me was reacting to something distant. I sat there frozen, rod still in hand, line limp in the water. The brightness drew upward until it formed a narrow, vertical column of faint light, maybe the width of a small house, reaching a little way into the sky. It stayed like that for 3 or 4 seconds, long enough that it didn't seem like a trick of my eyes. Then it folded inward and vanished. No fade out, no lingering afterglow, just gone. leaving the horizon darker than it had been before. For a minute, I didn't move. I just kept listening to the lake, waiting for some sound, wind, birds, anything, to prove that what I'd seen hadn't affected the rest of the world. Everything stayed quiet, unnaturally quiet. Even the frogs had stopped. I reeled in slowly and cast again, more out of habit than intention. My hands were shaking a little. I kept glancing toward the spot where the glow had been, expecting it to return. The mist on the water was still drifting toward that same area, even though the brightness was gone. No wind on my face. The air felt dead. After a few minutes, I decided to stand. My legs felt stiff, like I'd been sitting longer than I thought. I checked my watch. 5:07 a.m. Sunrise wasn't supposed to be until 5:32 that day. I double-checked because the sky suddenly looked a bit lighter than it should have, but not where the glow had been. That part of the horizon looked darker, actually, like the light had taken something with it when it left. Something splashed behind me, maybe a fish jumping, but it startled me enough that I flinched. I turned around quickly and scanned the lake. Nothing but ripples. But the ripples were moving strangely, not outward evenly, but almost sideways, like something beneath the surface had nudged the water in a direction instead of a point. I told myself fish do weird things all the time. The lake isn't exactly predictable. But then I heard another small splash, same direction, same pattern of sideways ripples, and the mist overhead shifted again, like something invisible passed just under it. I walked back toward the start of the dock without reeling in. I just held the rod awkwardly in one hand like I'd forgotten what to do with it. Halfway down the dock, I felt another pressure shift in my ears, sharper this time, enough that I had to swallow to clear them. I turned and looked back toward the horizon. For maybe half a second, less honestly, I saw a pinpoint of white light directly above where the glow had been. Tiny, like a star, but lower in the sky. It blinked once, with no real rhythm, and then faded out completely. The sky still wasn't brightening normally. I packed up without really packing, just unhooked the line and wrapped it sloppily around the reel. My hands felt clumsy. I remember looking down at them and noticing how pale they looked in the dim light, like the world had shifted its color balance. By the time I got back to shore, the mist had pulled away from the lake edges and gathered toward the middle. That's not something mist usually does. It clings to the edges, the shallows. But this looked like it was flowing inward, drawn by something. When I reached the grassy bank, I turned around one last time. The horizon looked normal again, dark blue, fading slowly toward dawn. If I hadn't seen the light retract upward, I would have believed nothing had happened. But the quiet still felt wrong. Even the distant hum of the highway, a constant background noise near Lake Merrow, was softer, delayed somehow, like it had to travel farther. I got into my truck and started the engine. The headlights flickered once before stabilizing. That bothered me more than it should have. I backed up, turned onto the dirt road that leads back to town, and kept glancing at the sky through the windshield. Nothing followed me. Nothing glowed. Nothing shimmered. A few minutes into the drive, my radio turned on by itself. Volume low, the display blank, only static. I reached to turn it off, and as soon as my fingers touched the knob, the static stopped. Not switched off. Stopped, like something had cut the sound mid-transmission. The radio went dead again. When I got home, the sky finally looked like a normal sunrise. Pinks and oranges creeping in from the edges, birds starting up, cars leaving early for work. Everything felt grounded again. Still, when I thought back to that narrow band of light on the horizon, the way it hadn't spread, the way it rose like something being lifted out of sight, I knew I hadn't imagined it. And the silence that followed it was too deep, too complete, to be anything natural. Every time I fish there now, I keep one eye on the eastern horizon, waiting for the moment the sky behaves in a way it shouldn't. I was standing in my backyard a little after 9, mostly just killing time while my dog Luna sniffed every patch of grass like she'd never been outside before. It had rained earlier, one of those short evening showers that leaves everything damp but doesn't cool anything off. The air smelled muddy and warm. Clouds were moving fast overhead, thin patchy ones catching bits of moonlight in different places. Nothing felt strange at first. It was just another humid night in a small neighborhood outside Canaville. Quiet except for the usual bugs, a distant AC unit, and the occasional car passing the main road. Then my ears popped. Not both at once, just the left one first, then the right, like someone pressing lightly on the sides of my head. It wasn't painful, just sharp and sudden enough to make me stop walking. I swallowed, trying to equalize them the way you do on an airplane, but the pressure didn't settle immediately. It clung there for a few seconds, buzzing faintly behind the eardrum. I looked around without knowing why. It wasn't instinct exactly, more like the atmosphere around me had shifted in a way my body reacted to before my brain could catch up. Luna froze too, halfway through lifting her leg on the cherry tree. Her ears went rigid. The cricket stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. If anything, it was weaker than a star, but bigger. A little sphere of pale white drifting between the clouds, moving at a slow, steady pace. At first, I thought it was a plane caught behind the wispy layers, but there was no blink, no red or green navigation light, no sound. It made no sense how quiet it was. Normally, when it's that still out, you can hear a jet miles away. This thing was silent. Luna whimpered, low and uncertain, and stayed glued to my leg. She almost never does that. She's usually too focused on marking the entire property as hers. The light slid out from behind one cloud and into a clear patch. That's when I realized it wasn't as far away as I first assumed. The size was wrong. Too big to be a star, too defined to be a planet, too small to be anything I'd expect to see that low in the sky. It looked like it was maybe a few hundred feet up. Hard to tell, but it wasn't space high. I held my breath without meaning to. The pressure in my ears faded, but the silence didn't. The light dipped slightly, like it was adjusting its path. Not wobbling like a balloon, not curving like a drone, just a soft, deliberate change in direction. Then it moved laterally, cutting across the sky in a smooth arc that didn't match the wind direction at all. I checked the treetops. Barely any movement. The clouds above were moving west. The light drifted east. I didn't move. I felt like if I blinked, it would disappear. It drifted behind another cluster of clouds, dimming as the foggy layers passed over it. I waited for it to emerge on the other side. It didn't. I kept staring, counting seconds, trying to predict where it should have come out. 5 seconds. 10, 20. Nothing. Then the silence broke. Not with sound, but with the lack of something. The air felt thinner suddenly, like the humidity had been sucked out of it. Luna backed up until she hit the sliding door and scratched at it, whining now. I finally stepped backward too because the pressure in my ears came back again, this time gentler, like I was adjusting altitude. The sky looked normal now, just clouds moving fast, moonlight cutting through the gaps, the faint orange glow of town hanging beneath everything. But the moment felt wrong, like something had passed through and left the atmosphere settling behind it. I let Luna inside and stepped in after her, leaving the door open just a crack. Part of me wanted to shut it immediately, but the other part felt weirdly drawn to keep watching outside. I turned off the kitchen light so the reflection wouldn't block my view. The crickets hadn't come back yet. The silence in their place felt too heavy. I watched the sky for a good 2 minutes, waiting for the light to reappear. Nothing happened. The pressure in my ears faded again, slowly this time, like easing out of a deep tunnel. I told myself it could have been anything. A drone with its lights diffused through the moisture, a helicopter moving away silently, the moon reflecting weird off wind-blown mist. But none of those explanations matched the way it moved, or the way the air reacted, or the way the animals went quiet all at once. I closed the sliding door and locked it. I almost never lock it until I go to bed. As I walked through the living room, I felt something shift in the house, like a faint tremor. Just one subtle vibration through the floorboards, not enough to rattle anything, but noticeable enough that I stopped walking. It didn't repeat. Luna didn't react. That made it even stranger. I checked the time on the stove, 9:14 p.m. Then I glanced at the microwave, 9:11. My phone said 9:12. The clocks weren't far apart, but they never disagreed. Not by minutes. And they weren't wrong earlier. I'd checked the stove clock when I started making dinner around 7. Everything had matched then. I didn't try to fix them. Something about adjusting the clocks felt like admitting something unusual had happened. I went back to the sliding door one more time and peered outside. The crickets had finally started up again, but weakly, like they were testing the air first. A breeze moved through the neighborhood, shaking the branches and rustling the leftover rain off the leaves. Everything looked normal, but the silence from earlier still lingered somewhere in the back of my mind like an imprint. So did the memory of that small floating light, how it drifted with purpose, how it vanished in the middle of open sky, and how the entire environment seemed to respond to it in ways I didn't have words for. I didn't stay up waiting for it to return. I went to bed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint glow moving between the clouds. Too deliberate, too silent, too aware. And every now and then, on completely ordinary nights, my ears pop the same way. And for a few seconds, the world around me holds its breath again. The power went out around 10:40 p.m. I remember because I was halfway through cleaning the kitchen when everything clicked off at once. The lights, the fridge hum, even the neighbor's annoyingly loud porch TV. The house went so still that I just stood there for a second waiting for the grid to kick back on, but it didn't. Blackouts aren't common where I live in Briar Ridge, but they happen often enough after windstorms, except it hadn't been windy. It had been calm all evening, the air warm and heavy, and that way it gets before summer really settles in. With nothing else to do, I stepped outside onto the back deck to see if the whole neighborhood had gone dark. It had. Every house, every street lamp, the little diner down on Willow, everything was out. The only light came from the moon, which was half covered by thin clouds drifting in slow sheets. What stood out almost immediately was the silence. Blackouts usually come with people talking, dogs barking, someone starting a generator, but none of that was happening. It felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I leaned on the deck railing and looked up at the clouds. That's when I saw it. A patch of sky toward the southwest, maybe the size of a small house if you could draw a box around it, was glowing faintly blue. Not bright, not anything you'd mistake for lightning. More like someone had placed a sheet of frosted glass behind the clouds and shined a dim light through it. The glow held steady, not flickering, not pulsing. It didn't fit the rest of the sky at all. I squinted, thinking maybe it was moonlight catching the edge of a thicker cloud bank. But the moon was on the opposite side of the yard, behind me. There were no planes overhead either. No sound, no lights, nothing. The glow felt self-contained, like it was illuminating only the cloud it touched and nothing around it. After maybe 10 seconds, I felt a shift in the air, not wind. More like the pressure inside my ears changed slightly, the way it does when you're in an elevator rising one floor too fast. It wasn't strong, just enough to notice, enough to make me swallow once to clear the feeling. The blue patch brightened a little, not dramatically, but enough that it was definitely increasing in intensity. The cloud beneath it almost seemed to thin for a moment, like the light was pushing through. I stepped off the deck and into the yard without realizing I had moved. The grass was cool under my feet. The whole sky outside the glowing patch looked darker because every streetlight was still dead, so the blue area really stood out. Then, even though there was no actual sound, I felt something like a vibration in my chest. Not sharp, more like the low sub-bass you feel in your body at a concert. It lasted maybe a second. Luna, my neighbor's dog, whined from across the fence. A strange, uneasy sound. She almost never makes noise at night. The glow shifted. It didn't move sideways or downward. It narrowed, like a beam being tightened, though nothing shot downward from it. The edges drew inward and concentrated toward the center. The cloud beneath it became almost transparent with the brightness, but only in that small circular area. Then it dimmed abruptly. Not slowly the way a spotlight would fade, but like someone had snapped the power off. The blue evaporated from the cloud, leaving just the dark gray shape of it blending with the rest of the sky. 2 seconds later, every light in the neighborhood came back on. A sudden surge, street lamps flicking to life, houses glowing, window units humming, porch TVs buzzing back. It startled me enough that I actually flinched. The deck light behind me clicked on, lighting the yard in a harsh yellow glow that made the sky look normal again. I turned back toward the southwest, but the clouds were just clouds now. No trace of blue light, no thinning or hole in the cloud layer, just normal evening sky with normal moonlight. My heart was still racing a little, though I didn't want to admit it to myself. I went back inside, but I wasn't ready to sit down or turn the TV back on. The house felt different. Too bright after the blackout, too loud with all the appliances coming back at once. I walked to the front window to check the street. The neighbor across from me, Mrs. Carmichael, was standing on her porch looking up at the sky. Her body language said she'd seen something too. I considered going outside to ask her, but something in me hesitated. I didn't want to hear her tell me she hadn't seen anything unusual. Worse, I didn't want her to ask what I thought I saw. I stood there until she finally went inside. When I went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up, I noticed the digital clock on the microwave blinking. It always resets after a blackout, but the time it showed was strange, 12:03. I checked my phone, 11:57. Not a huge difference, but blackouts usually send everything back to the same default time. My stove clock said 12:04. My coffee maker said 12:03. But my phone, which hadn't lost power, insisted it wasn't midnight yet. I didn't adjust anything. I tried sitting down in the living room, but I kept glancing at the window. I don't know what I expected to see. Another blue glow, maybe something moving behind the clouds. Instead, everything looked normal. The lights on the street didn't flicker. The bugs started up again after a few minutes, sounding too loud after their absence. Around midnight, I finally shut the blinds. The next morning, I checked the weather report and the outage summary posted online. They said a transformer issue caused the blackout. No mention of anything happening in the sky. No mention of atmospheric anomalies or scattered lightning. Nothing that matched what I'd seen. I even walked outside and looked toward the southwest again. It was just blue sky. Birds chirping, cars driving by. Nothing unusual. But when I stood there long enough, that faint pressure shift feeling returned for half a second. Like my ears were remembering something the rest of me didn't know how to explain. The moment passed. The sky stayed normal. Still, every time the power flickers now, even for a split second, I catch myself looking out the nearest window, half expecting to see that small patch of blue light glowing behind the clouds, bright enough to notice, dim enough to deny, and gone the second the world remembers how to turn back on. I was hiking alone on the Ridgeview Trail just outside Pine Hollow. It was late October, one of those cold, dry mornings where the air feels thin and the ground crunches under your boots. I'd taken the day off work because I needed a break from everything: emails, calls, the noise of town. The trail is usually empty on weekdays, especially once the temperature drops, so I figured I'd have the place to myself. About an hour in, I reached a long, straight stretch where the trail leveled out. The sun had only just cleared the tree line behind me, and the light was that pale, washed-out color you get on cold mornings. I remember checking my breath, noticing how fast it fogged and disappeared. That's when I saw the shimmer. It was maybe 20 feet ahead of me, right in the middle of the trail. At first I thought it was my eyes adjusting to the sunlight, like when you look at something too bright and the edges ripple a bit. But this didn't go away. It hung in the air, a narrow vertical distortion, like heat above asphalt. Except it was barely 40 degrees out. There was frost on the leaves. Nothing should have been radiating heat. I stopped walking without meaning to. The shimmer stayed in place, completely still. No shape to it. No glow. Just a wavering in the air, subtle enough that if I hadn't been looking straight ahead, I might have missed it. I waited for it to fade. It didn't. I blinked a few times, looked around, rubbed my eyes. It was still there. I took a slow step forward. The shimmer twitched. I froze again. The air around me felt normal. No change in temperature, no wind picking up, nothing sensory to explain what I was seeing. But the shimmer, it shifted, almost like something had moved behind it. Not toward me, more like it slid sideways a few inches. That movement hit me harder than seeing it in the first place. I thought about turning around right then. But the shift had been so slight that part of me wondered if it was just a trick of the light. Trees moving. My glasses smudged. Something normal. I wiped my lenses on my shirt and looked again. Still there. Same spot. Maybe a little dimmer, but still shimmering. I took another step, slower this time. The air pressure changed, not dramatically, just enough that my ears tightened for a moment. If I hadn't been focused on every tiny thing, I might not have noticed. The shimmer jerked. Not much, but enough to confirm it wasn't random. It reacted. Not like an animal or a person, more like whatever caused it was adjusting its position in the air. My chest tightened. I backed up a couple steps, careful not to make noise, though I'm not sure why noise mattered. The woods felt unnaturally quiet. No birds. No wind, nothing crunching except my own boots. The shimmer drifted left. That movement, smooth, deliberate, hit some instinctive part of my brain that told me to stop watching it, to get off that trail. But I couldn't look away. Something about the way it floated, like it wasn't bound by air or ground, didn't make sense. Every explanation I tried to reach for fell apart. Fog, breath, wrong spot. Insects, too cold. Reflection, nothing shiny nearby. It came to rest near a cluster of bare saplings, hovering a few feet above the ground. Then it stretched, only for a second, like an elastic band pulled upward. The distortion grew taller and thinner, then snapped back into its original shape. The motion was too fast and too smooth to be anything natural. I heard something then, a faint popping sound, like static discharging. Not loud, not sharp, just a tiny crackle that came from the shimmer itself. I stepped back again. My foot landed on a branch, and the snap echoed through the quiet woods. The shimmer jerked upward. It didn't fly off, it didn't turn into anything, it just blinked out. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No fade, no drift, just gone, like flipping off a projection. I waited a good 30 seconds before moving. The pressure in my ears faded, but the forest stayed quiet. No birds returning, no wind. It felt like the world hadn't started up again yet. Carefully, I walked forward toward where it had been. My boots felt too loud on the frost. When I reached the spot, nothing looked disturbed, no footprints except mine, no bent branches, no heat rising from the ground. I held my hand out, testing the air. It felt the same as everywhere else, cold, dry, normal. But something was wrong. I realized I hadn't seen my own breath since the shimmer vanished. I exhaled intentionally. Nothing. No fog. The air didn't produce it. It was still cold enough that I should have been seeing it, but I didn't. I backed away, not fast, but steady. After about 10 steps, I exhaled again and saw the fog return. Thin at first, then full. I tried stepping forward the same distance. No breath cloud. I didn't like that at all. I kept moving back until I felt like I'd returned to whatever normal was. The breath fogged. My ears didn't feel tight. The woods still felt too quiet, but at least the air behaved the way it should. I turned around and headed back down the trail toward the parking area. My pace was faster than before, but not a sprint. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to draw attention. Though from what, I didn't know. About 5 minutes later, I finally heard something again. A single bird call. Then another. Then the wind picked up slightly, brushing through the branches. The forest eased back into itself as if someone had turned the volume up. I didn't stop walking. When I reached the clearing near the trailhead, I looked back one more time. The trail was empty. Nothing shimmered. Nothing moved. The world looked completely ordinary. I drove home without turning the radio on. I kept thinking about the way the distortion had reacted to my movements, like it knew where I was, like it was aware of me as much as I was aware of it. Later, when I checked the weather, the temperature had stayed in the mid-30s the entire morning. There was no reason for breath to disappear like that. I didn't go back to Ridgeview Trail for a while, and when I eventually did, I stayed on the lower loop, closer to town. Some places feel fine once you leave them. That stretch of trail didn't. I was driving back from my cousin Eric's place in eastern Kansas, taking one of those long stretches of highway that barely even counts as a road. It was close to midnight, cold enough that the air outside had that dry, brittle sound against the windows. I wasn't tired exactly, but the kind of bored where your mind goes quiet and you're just moving through darkness with nothing to focus on except the yellow divider lines and whatever song comes on the radio. About an hour into the drive, the radio cut out. Not a normal signal drop. The music didn't fade or crackle, it just stopped mid-note, like someone hit pause. Then it switched to straight static, not the loud hissing kind, but a thin whispering static, followed by a long, low tone. It wasn't a beep. It wasn't anything I'd heard from a station test. It sounded like a held note on a keyboard, except flatter, almost mechanical. It vibrated just enough that I felt it in the steering wheel. I checked the display. It still showed the same station I'd been listening to. I figured it was interference. The highway cut through a bunch of farmland, huge empty fields with old metal irrigation rigs that I'd heard could mess with signals, so I reached for the dial. Before I touched it, the tone stopped. Not like a fade out, just gone. The static cut off too. A half second later, the music came back exactly where it had left off, like nothing had happened. I kept driving, but something felt off. The air inside the car seemed heavier. The kind of pressure you get right before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud anywhere. The sky had been clear when I left Eric's, and it still looked clear from what I could see around the edges of my headlights. A few minutes later, I noticed a faint glow in the rearview mirror. At first I thought it was a distant car cresting a hill behind me, except the highway was flat for miles, and the light wasn't bright enough to be headlights. It was more like someone holding a flashlight high above the road, aimed downward but far away. It stayed right at the edge of the mirror. No flickering, no shaking, just there. I checked over my shoulder, nothing on the road itself. No cars, no reflections, no aircraft lights blinking in the sky. When I looked back into the mirror, the glow was still there, matching my speed exactly. I did that thing where you speed up a little without meaning to. Went from 65 to 70, then 75. The light didn't grow or shrink, but it stayed with me. Same position in the mirror, same distance. I told myself it was a trick of the eyes. Long night, long road, empty fields messing with depth perception. But I glanced again and the glow seemed slightly brighter. Not in a blinding way, just sharper, more defined. And it wasn't white, it had a faint bluish tint to it, almost like bioluminescence. The farmhouses along that stretch were rare, maybe one every mile, and all of them dark. No porch lights, no yard lamps. But as I passed the next one, I noticed the security light over the barn flicker. Just once, like a dying bulb. Then the barn went dark completely. The faint glow behind me didn't change. When the next farmhouse came into view, its security light blinked out too. I wasn't close to either of them. I hadn't done anything to affect them. They were at least a couple 100 feet from the road. I gripped the wheel tighter. Then something else happened. My ears popped. The way they do when you're in an airplane dropping altitude, except more sudden. I tried swallowing to clear them, but the pressure didn't go away. It hung there, dense and uncomfortable, like the air in the car had thickened. I cracked the window to equalize it. The cold air poured in, but the pressure stayed. The light in the mirror brightened again, this time enough that I could make out the shape of the glow a little better. It wasn't round. It wasn't any clear shape, really. More like a smear of light, elongated, stretching horizontally like a haze. It didn't wobble, didn't drift, just followed. I flicked off my headlights for a second. The highway ahead went black except for the faint shine of the moon on the asphalt. In the rear view, the glow stayed exactly the same, unchanged by the loss of a reflective surface. When I turned the headlights back on, I realized my pulse had sped up. My hands felt colder on the wheel. The car felt smaller. I kept telling myself it had to be something explainable. A distant aircraft at a weird angle, a reflection off my rear window, maybe a tower light far away. But none of those ideas stuck. Nothing behaved like what I was seeing. Then the radio made that tone again. A perfectly steady note, same pitch as before. But this time it wasn't coming from the speakers alone. I felt it inside my chest, like the vibration ran through the frame of the car. The whole dashboard hummed. I reached toward the radio, but the moment my hand got close, the tone stopped. The static vanished. A new song began, like the station had changed without showing anything different on the display. I recognized the track. I'd heard it earlier in the drive. And by earlier, I mean maybe half an hour before. Same song, same opening notes. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't one of those stations that cycles a short playlist. It shouldn't have been playing again so soon. My throat tightened a little. I turned off the radio completely. The silence inside the car felt sharper than it should have. I checked the rear view again. The light had moved, not farther away, not closer. It had risen, higher above the road. The angle shifted enough that I could see the faint glow through the top edge of my windshield now, a weak bluish tint reflecting off the glass. I didn't slow down, but I loosened my foot on the gas just enough that the speedometer dipped slightly. The glow adjusted instantly. It matched me perfectly. I don't know why that detail bothered me more than anything else, but it did. It was the precision. Cars behind you don't match speed the instant you change it. Aircraft don't either, especially not without moving horizontally. This thing, whatever it was, responded instantly, and then it faded. Not all at once, slowly, like someone dimming a lamp from a distance. The blue tint dried out to white, then yellowish, then nothing. The pressure in my ears eased until it was gone. Up ahead, a lone streetlight on the edge of a crossroads flickered back on, steady and normal. No sound, no wind, no signs of anything in the sky. I drove all the way to the next town before I turned the radio on again. When I did, the station came in perfectly clear. No static, no tone, no repeating songs. But the display was showing a different frequency than the one I'd tuned to earlier. I hadn't changed it. I knew that for a fact. Even stranger, when I got home and checked my trip time, it seemed a little short. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. Maybe I'd just driven faster than I realized. Or maybe the stretch of highway felt longer because of everything that had happened. I parked, grabbed my bag, and went inside. The house was quiet, the normal kind of quiet. I stood in the hallway longer than I meant to, listening for anything out of place. Nothing was. But for the next few nights, whenever I passed a window after dark, I caught myself glancing up. Not at the stars, but at the empty air above the streetlights, just to make sure nothing was following me anymore. I was cutting through the neighborhood park on my way home from a late shift. It was close to 1 a.m, cold enough that my breath looked like smoke each time I exhaled. The park lights were on timers and had already shut off, so the only illumination came from a few scattered street lights and the distant glow of the town center reflecting off low clouds. I usually walk fast through that area. It's safe enough, but the emptiness always feels bigger at night. That night, though, I wasn't thinking about anything except how tired I was. My feet hurt, my shoulders ached, and all I wanted was a hot shower. Halfway down the paved path, I noticed something strange with my shadow. I only saw it because I happened to look down. My shadow stretched out behind me, way farther than it should have. The nearest light source was a dim sodium lamp by the playground, maybe 20 yards ahead. Under normal circumstances, my shadow would angle forward, left toward me, not backward, but there it was, a long, thin silhouette trailing behind my feet like someone had pulled it taut, twice as long as usual. 3 times, maybe. It reached toward the line of trees that bordered the park. I stopped walking. My shadow didn't. Not right away, at least. For a second or two, the elongated shape seemed to lag, like it had inertia, like whatever was casting it was adjusting. Then, very abruptly, it snapped into its normal proportions. Just like that. The air felt heavier around me, not colder, not darker, just heavier, like the atmosphere had thickened by a few degrees. My ears tightened with a small pressure shift, the kind you get before driving up a hill. That's when I noticed the dim light overhead. I hadn't heard anything. No engine, no wind, no rustling of branches. But when I looked up, I saw a faint, hazy glow drifting above the park. Not bright enough to illuminate anything directly, not enough to cast strong shadows, but enough that I could see the edges of the clouds catch it. It was higher than a streetlight, but lower than the cloud layer. No sharp outline, more like a muted orb, almost egg-shaped, sliding very slowly across the sky. At first I thought it might be a drone. People fly them around the park sometimes, but the light had no blinking pattern, no red or green, no white strobe. And drones make noise, a low buzz at least. This thing was silent. I waited for the glow to brighten or dim. Instead, it just drifted, smooth and even, almost like it was trying not to be noticed. I stared until my eyes started to water from the cold. And then it faded. Not drifted into clouds, not turned away. It just thinned out, like the brightness was being dialed down. The last part of the glow disappeared in a small shrinking point, the way a CRT television used to blink off in the middle. When it vanished completely, the pressure in my ears released and the normal ambient noises returned. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A car door slammed in the distance. Even the subtle hum of the traffic lights at the intersection came back. I realized then that those sounds had been absent the whole time, though I hadn't noticed until they returned. My shadow looked normal again, completely normal, just the way it should under a single, weak light source. I started walking, this time faster. There was nobody else around, not even a passing car. My footsteps seemed too loud on the pavement. I tried to convince myself the stretched shadow had been caused by two light sources overlapping, except there were no lights behind me. The block behind the park had lost a streetlight weeks before, and it still hadn't been replaced. The nearest lights back there were on people's porches, and even those were pointed downward. As I reached the exit of the park, something flickered at the edge of my vision. I turned to look, expecting an animal in the bushes. But it wasn't that. For a moment, just a brief one, the shadows cast by the swing set were angled wrong. They pointed backward, away from the playground light, as if something bright had been behind them. Then they snapped back to normal too. I didn't like how fast I started to breathe after that. My heart felt too heavy in my chest, like I was bracing for something I couldn't identify. The rest of the walk home is sort of a blur. Not because anything unusual happened along the way, nothing did, but because I couldn't stop replaying the moment in the park. The elongated shadow, the pressure in my ears, the dim glow drifting silently overhead and vanishing like someone pulling a plug. When I finally reached my house, I stood at the door longer than usual, listening for anything out of place. I didn't hear anything. The neighborhood sounded normal. Sprinklers kicking on, a TV muffled through a wall, wind brushing past a loose gutter panel. Everything ordinary. Inside, I went straight to the bathroom mirror. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see my reflection behave normally. It did. Nothing strange happened. But when I turned off the light to go to bed, the room felt a fraction darker than usual, like my eyes were still adjusting from something brighter, even though the glow in the park had been barely visible. I lay awake longer than I wanted to, listening to the heater cycle on and off, thinking about how shadows behave, how they always obey the laws of light, how they don't stretch without a source, and how nothing had been behind me on that empty path. The next evening, I took a different route home. Not because I was afraid exactly, but because I didn't trust the air in that park anymore. Sometimes, when I'm walking at night, I'll catch myself glancing at the ground first, checking my shadow before I check the sky. I was staying at my friend Nolan's cabin outside Crestridge for a long weekend. It's the kind of place where cell service drops off completely once you get past the last empty gas station, and the nearest neighbor is a mile down a dirt road that looks more like a dried-up creek bed. The cabin itself wasn't anything special, just a little A-frame with a wood stove and 2 rooms, but the land around it made you feel like you were on another planet. Dense pines, a ridge that blocked the western sky, and nothing but open meadow on the eastern side. The first night was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but cold enough that the windows fogged along the edges and the stove crackled nonstop. I'd fallen asleep on the couch because the bedroom smelled like old paint, and sometime around 5 in the morning, I woke up without knowing why. I didn't hear anything, didn't feel anything. I just opened my eyes like someone had tapped my shoulder. The first thing I noticed was the brightness. It wasn't daylight, at least not the way dawn normally looks. The sky outside the front windows had this pale glow to it, soft but steady, like someone had stretched a huge fluorescent panel across the horizon. It wasn't shining into the cabin directly, but it brightened everything enough that I didn't need a lamp to see. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. It didn't make sense. Sunrise wasn't for at least another 40 minutes. Even then, the light spreads gradually, tinting the edges of the landscape before anything gets that bright. This looked like skipping straight ahead to the part where the sun is just below the ridge but not visible yet. I leaned forward on the couch and checked the clock on Nolan's wall. 5:18 a.m. Way too early. For a minute, I thought maybe the moon was out and hitting some thin layer of fog. But when I looked through the side window, the moon wasn't visible at all. The sky didn't even look like night anymore, just this uniform pale gray blue. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside onto the porch. The cold hit me immediately, sharper than inside. The air smelled like wet bark and dirt, typical for that area. But it was silent, not quiet, silent. No wind, no birds, no creaking trees, just stillness that pressed in around my ears. The strange glow stretched across the entire eastern sky. It wasn't rising or dimming, it just hung there, bright and flat. The ridge behind the cabin blocked the western view completely, but the rest of the sky looked washed out, colorless. At first, I expected it to start spreading the way dawn usually does, widening, softening, changing hue. But it didn't. It stayed the same, as if the sky had forgotten what it was supposed to do. I walked off the porch a little, boots crunching on the frosted grass. The meadow stretched out in front of me, untouched except for an old picnic table Nolan's dad had dragged out there years ago. Even that looked strange in the light, its edges too sharp, too defined, like the glow wasn't shining on it but through it somehow. That's when I noticed something else. The light wasn't spreading outward, it was tightening. Very slowly at first, almost unnoticeable. But after a minute or two, I realized the bright area was shrinking, not dimming, just pulling inward toward a single point above the horizon. It didn't behave like sunlight or like any natural light I'd seen. It moved with a kind of purpose, contracting in on itself. I should have gone inside right then. I knew that. But I just kept staring because nothing in my brain had a category for what I was seeing. About the time the glow had concentrated into a patch, maybe the width of a house, the pressure in my ears changed. Not painfully, but enough that I swallowed instinctively. The kind of pressure drop you feel before a storm, except the air was clear. I turned around to see if anything behind me had changed. Maybe I was imagining the pressure shift, but everything looked the same. The cabin, the trees, the frost on the windowsill, all normal. When I faced the meadow again, the glow was half its previous size. And it was rising, not like the sun coming up, where the light creeps upward. This patch moved as a whole, lifting straight into the sky like a lantern on a string. The edges stayed crisp, the brightness unchanged. It didn't flicker, it didn't make a sound. I felt something tighten in my chest, a weird mix of fear and curiosity. I tried to convince myself it could be a weather thing, maybe some kind of atmospheric reflection or light pollution bouncing off high clouds. But the sky was clear. There were stars in every direction except where that glow moved. As it rose higher, the meadow darkened beneath it. Dawn returned to the normal, faint pre-light you'd expect at that hour. That contrast made the glow look even stranger, too controlled, too self-contained. Then the glow stopped rising. It hung there for a few seconds, suspended in the air, maybe 1,000 feet up. Still bright, still wrong. It contracted again, faster this time. The circle of light folded inward like something pulling tight fabric. The sky around it darkened so quickly that it felt like someone unplugged the world. A blink later, the glow vanished completely. No fade, no trail, just gone. And the sky snapped back to its true pre-dawn darkness, stars intact. I stood there frozen, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, a flicker, anything. But nothing changed. The meadow looked normal again. My breath came out in fog. A few birds started calling in the trees behind the cabin, like dawn had actually resumed on its rightful schedule. When I went back inside, the clock read 5:26 a.m. 8 minutes. That's how long the whole thing lasted. Maybe less. I sat on the couch without turning on a light. My hands were shaking a little, but not from the cold. I tried to replay the whole thing in my head, but it didn't feel real. It felt staged somehow, like I'd watched something happen behind glass that I wasn't supposed to see. A little after 6, the real sunrise started. Gently, slowly, the way it always does. No strange brightness, no abrupt shifts, just normal daylight creeping into the cabin. I didn't mention it to Nolan when he drove up later that morning. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Even now, it barely feels like something that happened to me. But whenever I think about that moment, the way the light pulled upward against everything I understood, it still makes me stop what I'm doing and listen to the sky, just to make sure it isn't happening again. I felt the vibration before I saw anything. I was lying in bed on my back, half awake, half asleep, in that weird space where your thoughts start blending together. I wasn't dreaming. I know that for sure because I was scrolling on my phone a minute earlier and I'd set it on the nightstand before rolling onto my pillow. The vibration wasn't like my phone buzzing. It came from under me, through the mattress, soft and steady, almost like distant machinery or a generator heard through a concrete floor. Except my house sits on a raised wooden foundation. There's nothing underneath but crawl space and dirt, no appliances running, nothing that could make that kind of low, even hum. I remember holding still, thinking maybe it was just a passing truck on the main road a half-mile away. But trucks make sound. They rattle windows. This didn't. It was just vibration, not noise. A deep, quiet thrum that lasted maybe 5 seconds, faded a little, then came back stronger. I propped myself up on my elbows, confused and a little annoyed. The house was otherwise silent. No refrigerator click, no pipes creaking, nothing. Even the usual night insects outside had gone quiet. I didn't notice that at first. It hit me slowly, as the vibration tapered off again. I waited for it to start a third time, but instead the mattress went completely still. The absence of the shaking felt unnatural, too sudden, like something had been turned off abruptly. I sat up and looked toward the window. My curtains were closed, but the room had a faint bluish tint to it, as if someone was standing outside shining a soft light through the blinds. Not bright, just enough to make me hesitate before getting up. I slid out of bed and walked to the window. The instant I touched the curtain, the light outside moved. Not fast, more like a drift. I pulled the curtain back a couple inches. A dim light was floating above the treetops behind my house, maybe 30 or 40 feet up, moving in a straight line from left to right. The trees are tall pines, and this thing hovered just above them, gliding smoothly like a lantern being carried by an invisible cable. But lanterns flicker and bob. This didn't. It was steady, too steady for anything carried by wind. I strained to see details, but there weren't any. No beam, no halo, no defined shape, just a pale, rounded glow. Almost like fog lit from within, except the sky was perfectly clear and the air was cold and sharp. I should have been able to see stars behind it, but where the glow moved, the stars blinked out. I kept watching, frozen and barefoot on the hardwood floor, while the light slid behind one of the biggest pines. For a second, the tree trunk glowed faintly, outlining the branches in a weird, dull shimmer. Then the light drifted out the other side, dimmer than before. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear exactly. It was a sort of frozen confusion, like my brain hadn't figured out what emotion to attach to what I was seeing. The light slowed. It didn't stop. It just eased into a slower pace, like whatever was moving, it was adjusting its course. It hovered there for maybe 2 full seconds. My house was dead, quiet behind me. Even my own breathing felt too loud in the moment. Then it rose straight upward. Not angled, not drifting, straight up like it was being pulled by a string into the sky. The glow faded steadily as it went, shrinking into a pale dot, then a pinprick, and finally nothing at all. I let go of the curtain and stood there, listening to my house. Nothing moved. Nothing vibrated. But the silence was even heavier now, like the world outside was still holding its breath. I finally backed away from the window and sat on the edge of my bed. I listened for the vibration again, half expecting it to return, but the mattress stayed still. I checked my phone. No notifications, no random alarms, no reason I should have woken up. The clock read 2:41 a.m., but the seconds felt too slow. I watched them tick by with this weird sense that the rhythm wasn't quite right. I chalked it up to nerves, but it bothered me enough that I opened a different app just to see if the time matched. It did. I got up again and checked the window. More carefully this time. No light, no sound. The trees were just dark outlines against the night sky. The stars looked normal, sharp and unmoving. Everything was exactly as it should have been. I stood there until my feet started to hurt from the cold floor. When I finally crawled back into bed, I didn't turn the light on. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the vibration to come back. It didn't. Eventually I fell asleep, but it was the shallow kind where you wake every hour without knowing why. When morning came, the house felt normal again. Birds were loud outside, the fridge hummed, the mattress was still. But when I stepped out onto the back porch with my coffee, I noticed something in the yard I hadn't seen before. A patch of pine needles, in a circle maybe 6 feet across, had been flattened. Not trampled, flattened evenly, like something had pressed down softly but firmly from above. No footprints leading to it, no signs of animals. The edges were perfectly smooth. I stood over it, sipping my coffee, feeling the same frozen confusion from the night before. I didn't see the light again after that. The vibration never came back either. But every now and then, when I'm lying in bed before falling asleep, I press my hand against the mattress, not to feel anything moving, but to check that nothing is. And sometimes I catch myself watching the tops of the pines through the window longer than I mean to, waiting for that faint glow to drift by again. I was driving back from my sister's place in Clover Ridge, taking the long rural stretch of County 14 because it saves about 20 minutes if you don't get stuck behind a tractor. It was close to 10 p.m., early spring, the kind of night where the air is cool but not cold, and everything smells like damp dirt and leftover snowmelt. That road doesn't have streetlights, barely has reflectors, and the closest town is a good 15 miles away. I'd driven it so many times I didn't think twice about taking it in the dark. Had the radio on low, some oldie station playing a song I recognized from the drive up. The fields on either side were just wide, flat expanses disappearing into darkness. I remember thinking how empty everything felt, even more than usual, like the night had swallowed all the usual farm noises. The first strange thing was the sky. About 2 miles past the abandoned grain silo, the sky ahead of me changed color. Not bright, not dramatic, just faintly silver, like someone held up a giant sheet of aluminum really far away. It wasn't lightning, it wasn't moonlight. The sky wasn't glowing, it was reflecting something. That's what made it so unsettling. You don't expect the sky to reflect anything. I slowed down without realizing it. My headlights stretched across the gravel shoulder, but everything in front of me had this pale sheen, like driving toward a mirage. The silver wasn't uniform either. It had a texture, almost like brushed metal, shimmering slightly as if something moved behind it. I actually lifted my foot off the gas completely and rolled to a crawl. The hair on my arms stood straight up, and I didn't know why yet. I just knew something was wrong. The radio crackled. Not static, just a brief distortion, like the sound bent. The song kept playing, but the vocals wavered and dipped in pitch before smoothing out again. I looked down at the display, half expecting the station number to flicker, but it stayed the same. When I looked back up, the silver sky was changing. It wasn't silver anymore. It was thinning, fading upward like fog drawn into a vent, not rising like smoke, contracting, pulling itself into a narrower and narrower band until it became nothing but a faint line. Then that line folded into a bright pinprick and winked out. The sky went back to black, perfectly normal. I sat there for a second, foot hovering over the gas pedal, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Nothing moved. No cars were coming. The fields around me were silent, too silent. I finally exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. I hit the gas gently and started rolling forward again. The road looked the same as always, long, empty, flat. Whatever I'd seen didn't leave any sign behind. Then the song on the radio started over, not replayed on purpose, not like the station looped it. It restarted from the very beginning, same song, same opening notes, as if someone had hit rewind and play instantly. I knew for sure it was the same track because I'd been humming the chorus under my breath before everything went weird. I stared at the radio again. The time on the display hadn't changed. It didn't reset or blink. The station didn't change. But the song had definitely restarted itself. I turned the volume down. Not off, I just didn't want the music covering up whatever else I might hear. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, and the steering wheel felt slick under my palms. The next half mile felt like driving underwater. The air had weight to it, heavy and thick, like the pressure had shifted. My ears popped once, then popped again, even though the elevation wasn't changing. That was the second moment I should have turned around, but I didn't. I kept going, telling myself it was nothing, just some atmospheric thing or a radio glitch. That's all it could be. Then I saw movement in the field to my right. Not a person, not an animal, just movement. Darkness shifting against darkness. A long shape, low to the ground, gliding more than walking. It stayed parallel to the road, matching my speed even though I was going about 30 by then. I squinted through the window, trying to make out what it was. It wasn't big enough to be a cow. It wasn't moving like a deer. And it made no sound, no crunch of gravel, no breaking of brush, nothing. I tapped the brakes. The shape slowed. I pressed the gas. It sped up. I wasn't breathing at that point. I don't even think I blinked. I just kept watching that shape move in tandem with my car, like it was aware of me. The silver light did something. That's all I could think. Whatever I saw in the sky wasn't just light. It did something to the air, or the road, or me. Something wasn't normal anymore. I hit the brakes hard enough that the seatbelt locked. The shape stopped instantly, but not like it had momentum. Not like it slowed down. It just stopped, like someone paused a video frame. 1 second it was gliding, the next it was completely motionless. The radio made a soft click, as if powering off, but the screen stayed lit. The song stopped mid-word. My car idled in the middle of the road. The only sound was the engine and my breathing, sharp, uneven. The shape in the field didn't move, didn't shift, didn't drift away. It just stayed there, still and waiting. I don't know how long I sat like that, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. Long enough for my hands to start shaking on the wheel. Then something changed in the sky again, not silver this time. Just a faint glow, almost invisible, drifting high above the road. The kind of thing you'd miss entirely if you weren't already terrified and looking for anything out of place. It moved in a slow arc, like tracing the curvature of the earth, then faded before reaching the horizon. As soon as it vanished, the shadow shape in the field dissolved, not ran, not fell. Dissolved, like smoke blown apart by a wind I couldn't feel. The radio cut back in with the exact same song, in the exact same place where it had restarted before. No rewind this time, just continuing like nothing had happened. I started driving, slowly at first, then fast. Too fast for that road. I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that stretch of highway. When I finally saw the lights of the next town, I pulled into the first gas station and parked under the brightest canopy I could find. My legs took a second to cooperate when I tried to stand. The cashier probably thought I was drunk or exhausted from the way I walked inside. I stayed there almost an hour. The sky looked normal. My radio behaved normally. Every song played all the way through without restarting. But when I checked the route on my phone, the estimated drive time showed something strange. I'd arrived 8 minutes later than I should have, even with the speeding. I checked my dashboard clock. It matched my phone. Nothing obvious was missing. Just 8 minutes that didn't line up with the distance traveled. I drove home with the radio off after that. I still take County 14 sometimes. It's the only road that connects some of the smaller towns. But every time I'm on that stretch near the grain silo, I feel my hands tighten on the wheel, and I always watch the sky for silver. The power went out around 9:40 p.m., right in the middle of me reheating leftovers. Everything in my apartment clicked off at once. The microwave, the AC unit, the hallway light I always forget to switch off. It wasn't a huge surprise. Outages weren't uncommon in my part of Tacoma, especially on windy nights. But this time, the weather wasn't bad. Just cool and overcast, no rain, no wind strong enough to shake anything. I checked my phone. Full battery, but no service. That was unusual. Wi-Fi was obviously down, but the cell towers usually stayed up even during outages. I lit a candle, set it on the kitchen counter, and looked outside. My complex sat at the edge of a dead-end street, with a patch of trees beyond the parking lot. Normally you could see a few porch lights from neighboring buildings, maybe the glow of traffic on the main road a block over. But the whole area was completely dark. Every unit, every street light, even the grocery store sign at the corner. A full blackout. I stood there for a minute, letting my eyes adjust. The clouds were low enough that they reflected city light on normal nights, but now they were just a thick, dark ceiling. I couldn't make out any stars. That's when the glow started. It didn't appear all at once. It began as a smudge of pale brightness behind the clouds, not in one spot, but spread out like a soft backlight. Not white, not yellow, something faded and muted, like the glow from a frosted bulb. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the ground, but it was definitely there, coming from above the cloud layer. I turned off the candle to see better. The glow pulsed faintly, not rhythmically, just a soft increase, then a slow fade, then another brightening. It reminded me of lightning trapped deep in clouds, except there was no flicker, no sharpness, and absolutely no thunder. And the clouds weren't behaving like storm clouds. They didn't move, didn't ripple. They just hung there while the light inside them shifted. I stepped out onto my balcony to get a clearer view. The air felt strangely dense, almost humid, even though the forecast had been dry. The usual distant sounds, traffic, dogs barking, the freight train line 2 miles away, were absent. Everything was unnervingly still. My neighbor across the walkway, a guy named Ray, opened his sliding door. "Power out for you too?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "When did it happen?" "Just now. Whole street's dark." He leaned on the railing and stared upward. What's with the clouds? I don't know. He stood there silently for a minute. The glow brightened again, the strongest so far. The edges of the cloud layer lit up softly, tracing outlines like someone had drawn them in faint chalk. No beams, no directional source. The entire sky looked like it was lit from within. Lightning storm? He asked. There's no sound. He grunted and folded his arms. Feels weird out here. It did. The air pressure felt off, like before a change in weather, but sharper, more contained. My ears didn't pop, but something in my head felt tuned wrong, like I was standing near heavy machinery I couldn't hear. Ray pointed upward. Does it look lower to you? I hadn't noticed until he said it, but the clouds did seem closer than usual. Maybe an illusion from the glow. Maybe not. Before either of us said anything else, the glow shifted again, this time across the sky in a slow wave. It moved from west to east, a rolling swell of brightness passing through the clouds like something was traveling behind them, pushing the light along with it. But the clouds didn't move. Only the light did. Ray stepped backward. Nope. Nope. I'm going inside. He closed his sliding door and locked it. I stayed where I was. I don't know why. Maybe I felt safer watching it than looking away. The brightness passed overhead, soft but impossible to ignore. When it reached the far edge of the sky, it faded, not abruptly but gradually, like dimming a light switch. Then the pressure in the air seemed to ease. My ears felt normal again. The heaviness lifted. The sky went dark. I waited, staring upward, expecting another pulse. Another wave. Another anything. But the clouds were ordinary again. Just blank shapes barely visible against the night. Then the entire apartment complex flickered back to life. Streetlights buzzed on. A few porch lights clicked. Somewhere below me, a microwave beeped angrily, as if complaining about the interruption. My own lights flashed on too, washing the balcony with yellow. I shielded my eyes and stepped back inside. When I checked my phone again, service had returned. 2 missed alerts about a temporary network outage. But nothing that explained what we'd just seen. I opened the sliding door once more and looked up, half expecting the glow to return now that the power was back. But the sky was just dark, still and ordinary. Whatever had happened was over. I went downstairs to grab the mail just to feel normal again, but the parking lot felt off. Not dangerous, just unfamiliar, like the blackout had reset the neighborhood in some small way. A few people came out of their units with flashlights or phones, talking about the outage. None of them mentioned the sky. Ray's light came on behind his blinds, but he didn't come back out. I didn't try to explain it. I just went back upstairs, shut the door, and left the lights on longer than usual. Later that night, when I turned everything off to sleep, I couldn't stop glancing at the window, even though the clouds were hidden behind it and there was nothing to see. I listened for anything out of place, any hum, any shift in the pressure. Nothing happened, but every time I think about it now, I remember the way that glow moved. Not random, not natural, not like any weather I'd ever seen. More like something was traveling behind the clouds, bright enough to light them from within, quiet enough to leave the world completely still until it was gone. And how the power came back on just seconds after the sky went dark again, as if the timing wasn't accidental. I noticed it halfway down Pine Street, right after I passed the old laundromat with the busted neon sign. It was close to 11, a cool, clear night, the kind where you can hear your own footsteps a little too sharply. I had walked home that way 100 times, same cracked sidewalk, same leaning street lamps, same empty houses with their curtains drawn. But that night everything felt a little off, like the air was holding its breath. I wasn't thinking about anything important, just work stuff, what I was going to eat when I got home, whether my landlord ever planned on fixing the heater. Normal thoughts. And then I stepped under one of the taller streetlights, the one near the vacant lot, and something flickered on the pavement beside me. My shadow split. Not stretched, not distorted. Split. Like it peeled apart for a second. 2 silhouettes on the ground where mine should have been. One a little to the left of the other, both matching my shape exactly. My arms, my head, even the way my jacket hung. I stopped walking so fast I actually stumbled. The shadows froze too. 2 perfect outlines holding still on the concrete. Then they slid back together, smooth as if a magnet had pulled them. No delay, no gradual fade. 1 second, 2, the next just mine again, perfectly normal under the streetlight. I stared at the pavement for a long moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe another light source, maybe a passing car's headlights reflecting weirdly, but there was no car, no movement, and the streetlight above me didn't flicker. The air felt heavier suddenly, denser in my ears. Not painful, but like the pressure was shifting slightly out of sync with everything around me. I looked up. A dim light, very faint, almost colorless, was drifting overhead. Not fast, not bright enough to illuminate anything. Just a soft glow, moving in a slow arc above the street. No shape around it, no outline. If I hadn't been staring straight at that part of the sky, I would have missed it entirely. It wasn't a plane. Planes have blinking lights, red or white. Even high-altitude jets don't move that smoothly. And it wasn't a drone. Too high, too quiet. It floated like something weightless, something that didn't care about air currents or gravity. As I watched, the glow thinned, fading into the sky until there was nothing left but the usual dark blue of late night. No movement, no lingering brightness. Just gone. My shadow stayed normal. I kept standing there, breathing shallowly, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Stress, low blood sugar. Maybe the streetlight had glitched and thrown a double image. That made more sense than whatever that had been. I forced myself to walk again. My footsteps sounded too loud now, like the whole street was listening. I checked my shadow every few seconds without meaning to. It didn't change. But the pressure in the air lingered, this faint tightness behind my jaw, like altitude you can't pinpoint. When I reached my block, everything looked normal. Porch lights, a TV flickering through a window, someone's wind chimes barely moving, nothing out of place. But as I turned up my driveway, the pressure in my ears popped faintly, the way it does when you're driving over a hill. It was subtle, just a soft release. And then the night sounded normal again. Crickets, distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, all of it returning at once, like a switch had flipped. Inside my apartment, I locked the door before I even took off my shoes. I stood in the entryway for a minute, listening, making sure everything was the same as always. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked normal. My shadow on the wall behind me didn't do anything strange. I made myself a cup of tea I didn't really want, just to keep my hands busy. At some point, I checked the weather app, as if that might explain something. Clear skies, no unusual conditions, nothing that mentioned odd lights hanging over residential streets. Before going to bed, I pulled the curtains closed tightly. Not because I thought anything would be outside, but because I didn't want to risk seeing that faint overhead glow again, drifting without a sound. I slept badly. Every time a car passed or someone shut a door outside, I woke up and checked the walls for shadows that weren't forming right. In the morning, everything looked ordinary again. Sunlight, people walking dogs, cars starting up. The kind of normal that almost feels deliberate. I walked back to the streetlight where it had happened. The ground was just concrete. My shadow stayed solid and single, stretching cleanly behind me. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something to feel off again. Nothing did. But now when I walk home at night, I avoid walking directly under bright streetlights. I stick to the edges, where shadows blur instead of staying sharp. And I never look up unless I absolutely have to, because I keep remembering how smooth that second shadow moved, how cleanly it separated from me just for that moment, and how something faint and silent drifted above me before fading into the sky like it had never been there at all. I woke up sometime around 4 in the morning with that feeling, like someone had been standing right outside my bedroom window. Not a dream, not sleep paralysis, just a sudden alertness, the kind that snaps you up right before your brain catches up. My heart was already beating hard when I opened my eyes. The house was quiet. Too quiet for spring, honestly. I live outside Mariposa, near the edge of Sierra National Forest, and even at night there are always some sounds. Owls, wind in the pines, the occasional truck on the distant highway. But when I woke up, the silence hit me first. No insects, no breeze, not even the hum of the fridge seemed normal. It felt muffled, like something dampened all the noise. I didn't get out of bed at first. I just lay there, listening, staring at the faint outline of the curtains over the window. I could see a sliver of darkness between the panels, and that was enough to make me hesitate. I didn't want to move the curtains and see, I don't know what I expected. A person? An animal? Nothing at all. I told myself it was just an overactive brain. Maybe a loud noise I didn't remember hearing. Maybe the dog next door barking had woken me up. Except the neighbors didn't have a dog anymore. Their old one died in the winter. After a minute, I got up slowly and walked to the window. I didn't open the curtains. I just pressed my hands softly against the fabric and felt the slightest warmth on the inside. Not warm like sunlight, obviously, but warmer than the rest of the room. I pulled my hand away and felt the colder air around me again. That made no sense. Everything should have been the same temperature that early in the morning. I didn't open the curtains. I didn't want to. Instead, I went to the hallway and checked the front door to make sure it was locked. It was. The back door, too. Nothing looked disturbed. When I finally crawled back into bed, I stayed awake until dawn. By then, I'd half convinced myself it was nothing, just a weird half dream. But when the sun came up, I got dressed and went outside to look because I knew I wouldn't relax until I checked. The ground under the bedroom window looked wrong. Not disturbed, not like someone had dug or stepped heavily, just pressed. A shallow, wide indentation in the pine needles and dirt, maybe 3 or 4 feet across. Subtle enough that someone else might not have noticed it, but I know how the ground around my house looks. I sweep away needles every week. This indentation hadn't been there yesterday. There were no footprints, no sign of an animal, no shoe marks, just a gentle, even compression. I crouched down and touched it. The earth felt firmer, almost like something heavy had settled there briefly and then left without shifting its weight. I checked for animal tracks. Further out, nothing. I circled the house. Nothing. It was just that one spot, beneath the window where I'd woken up feeling watched. After breakfast, I tried to get my mind off it by working on the shed doors. The hinges always stick after winter storms, but I couldn't focus. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I glanced toward the house, expecting to see someone standing there. Around noon, I walked back to the indentation again. It looked the same as before. Not deeper, not disturbed, just the same wide, shallow dip. I took a picture of it, thinking maybe the camera would catch something my eyes didn't. The photo looked ordinary, just some flattened pine needles. That night, I left the porch light on, even though I don't usually. I sat in the living room with the TV on mute, listening for anything out of place. The forest sounded back to normal. Bugs, distant wind, even a coyote far off. Nothing strange. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but around midnight the house got quiet again, the same thick silence as the night before. It settled slowly, not all at once, like the world was turning the volume down a little at a time. I muted the TV completely. No crickets, no wind. Even the refrigerator hum thinned into almost nothing. I sat frozen on the couch, staring toward the hallway. I couldn't see the bedroom door from where I was, but I could picture the window perfectly. Thin curtains, that faint glow of the porch light filtering through. I forced myself to stand and walk toward the bedroom. My footsteps sounded dull, like the air absorbed the sound. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. The curtains weren't moving, but I sensed something on the other side of them. Not a shape, not a shadow, just a pressure. Like the space next to the house was occupied in a way my brain couldn't categorize. I didn't get any closer. I backed away slowly and returned to the living room, where I sat on the edge of the couch and waited. I don't know for how long, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Then, without warning, the normal night sounds came back. Crickets first, then a gust of wind, then the low hum of the house returning to itself. It didn't feel subtle, it felt like something heavy had lifted away. I didn't go outside until sunrise. When I did, the indentation under the window looked deeper. Not by much, just enough that I could tell the difference. Fresh pine needles had drifted into it during the night, but the shape was clearer now, like something wider than a person had settled there again. I didn't see footprints then either. I didn't tell Rachel or any of the neighbors. I didn't file a report. There was nothing to report except a vague sense that something I couldn't see had stood outside my window. Twice. For the next few nights, I slept in the living room with the curtains open so I could see everything. Nothing strange happened. No silence dropping over the house, no pressure in the air, no sense of being watched. After a week, things felt normal again. But the indentation under the window stayed. The wind shifted the pine needles around, but the ground itself remained pressed in a way it never had before. I finally scattered fresh soil over it, just so I wouldn't have to look at it every morning and wonder. Sometimes, I still wake up suddenly, convinced something is near the window again. Not often, but enough that I sleep lighter than I used to. And every time I step outside in the morning, I glance at that patch of ground, even though I covered it, half expecting to see the earth press down again, quiet and heavy, like something stood there in the night without leaving a single footprint. I only checked the doorbell footage because of the notification. It was a little after 2 a.m., and I wouldn't normally bother opening the app at that hour, but the alert said motion detected front yard, and something about that phrasing made me curious. My street in Cedar Ridge is usually dead quiet after 11. I figured it was probably a cat or a raccoon. When I opened the clip, the thumbnail already looked strange. The yard had this faint brightness to it. Not like the porch light, more like the whole image had been lightly bleached. I assumed it was just a glitch from the low light sensor. The video started normally enough. The front steps, the small patch of grass, the maple tree I always meant to trim back. Everything looked soft and grainy in the infrared mode. Nothing moved. No animals. No wind. Nothing. Then about 2 seconds in, the light changed. It wasn't sudden like a flash. More like something passed across the yard, something wide and diffuse. A pale wash moving left to right, but with no defined shape, no shadow, and no recognizable source. The camera adjusted exposure like it was confused. Brightened too much, then dimmed too far. And then the timestamp skipped. It jumped forward 5 seconds, exactly. No fade to black, no interruption message. Just one moment the light was mid-pass across the yard, and the next, the clip resumed in total darkness, as if whatever had happened was over. I replayed it maybe 10 times, each time convinced I'd catch some detail I'd missed. But it was always just that faint drifting brightness, and then the skip. I didn't want to make too much of it, so I put the phone down, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. But that brightness stuck in my mind. It didn't act like headlights. It had no beam shape, no pattern, no sharp edges the way a car or even a flashlight would create, and there was no sound. I didn't hear a car on the street, didn't hear anyone walking by, nothing. I told myself I'd review it again in the morning with a clearer head, except morning didn't help. I watched the clip on my laptop this time, zoomed in on the frame right before the skip. The light wasn't uniform, it had the slightest gradient to it, like something three-dimensional was reflecting or refracting light, but the camera couldn't capture the structure itself. The grass looked washed out, the tree trunk almost glowed. But the sky stayed dark. I downloaded the file, checked the metadata, everything looked normal. No corruption flags, no file size inconsistencies. The system genuinely believed the video was 12 seconds long, even though the visible content only covered about 7. Around noon, my neighbor across the street, Mrs. Merritt, came over to ask if I'd noticed power flickering around 2. She said her bedside clock had reset. I hadn't noticed anything. My phone had been on the charger, and nothing else in my house blinked or lost settings. When I asked if she'd seen anything outside, she just shook her head and said the dog had growled at the front window for a few minutes around that time, which was unusual for him. That made the footage harder to shrug off. That night, I left the porch light on and kept checking the live feed every hour or so. Nothing strange happened. Just the usual shadows from passing cars and the odd insect skittering across the lens. But around 1:40 a.m., the air in the house changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The pressure felt different, like before a storm, but without the heaviness. The bedroom felt slightly compressed. My ears didn't pop, but they wanted to. I sat up in bed, listening. No wind, no rain, no thunder. The house was quiet in that way where quiet feels purposeful. I opened the doorbell app again. Nothing on the feed. Yard looked normal. I got out of bed and went to the living room window. From there, I could see the street, the Merritt's place, and the stop sign at the end of the road. All still. Then the brightness came. Not as strong as the night before. Just a faint shift in the air. Almost like moonlight through thin clouds, but the moon wasn't out and the sky was overcast anyway. The street didn't light up. Nothing had a clear shadow. It was more like the quality of the darkness changed. I leaned closer to the window. Something moved across the Merritt's yard. Not a shape, not a figure, just another wash of light. A very soft drift, the same slow left-to-right motion I'd seen in the video. My phone vibrated in my hand. Motion alert. I opened the live feed. Nothing. Just black and white stillness. No brightness, no movement. But the glow outside my window was still happening. And as I watched, it crossed the street toward my side. The grass looked faintly silver for a second, then the sidewalk, then the patch in front of my porch. The camera saw none of it, but I did. And then, right when the glow reached the base of my maple tree, the doorbell feed stuttered. It didn't skip forward like before. It froze, completely motionless. Even the timestamp stopped. I dropped the phone onto the couch and took a step back from the window. The glow lingered around the tree for maybe 2 seconds. Then it lifted. Not upward like a beam or a flare. More like it unhooked itself from the ground and rose, slow at first, then smoother. By the time it reached the height of the second-story windows, the glow had thinned into almost nothing. A faint haze drifting upward until the overcast sky swallowed it. The camera feed unfroze. The timestamp resumed normally. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I checked the footage again. The recording showed nothing but a sudden freeze and a quick resync. A 2-second gap labeled signal interruption, no brightness, no wash of light, no visual anomaly, just a technical blip. Except I'd seen it with my own eyes. And the silence during it, that was the part that stayed with me. The neighborhood wasn't just quiet, it was drained of sound. No insects, no cars on the distant highway, not even the faint hum of the streetlights. Like everything paused to make room for whatever that glow was. I haven't mentioned any of this to the neighbors, not even Mrs. Merritt. I don't know what I'd even say. Hey, did your yard light up with no source and mess with your electronics for the second night in a row? I check the feed every night. I don't know what I expect to find. Maybe nothing, maybe the same light drifting through someone else's yard, but sometimes when the porch light flickers or the air pressure shifts just a little too suddenly, I stand at the window and wait, half expecting to see that pale wash moving quietly across the grass again, looking for something the camera can't capture. I was staying at my cousin Rachel's cabin near Bishop, California, helping her with some repairs after a heavy windstorm. She'd bought the place a few years earlier, but didn't visit much. And half the time, I think she just used me as free labor with the promise of quiet weekends in the mountains. I didn't mind. The cabin sat on a wide stretch of land dotted with sagebrush, with a clear view of the night sky that felt unreal compared to the light-polluted town I lived in. The night everything happened, Rachel had already gone to bed. She'd been exhausted from cleaning out the shed, and I'd stayed up because the weather was perfect. Cool, crisp, not a cloud anywhere. I pulled a camp chair out onto the patch of dirt behind the cabin and tipped it back, watching the sky the way I used to when I was a kid. No phone, no music, just stars. I don't stargaze often, so half of what I noticed felt new, even if it wasn't. The Milky Way was better defined than I'd ever seen it. There were faint streaks from what I assumed were satellites, the occasional plane crossing way off in the distance, all normal things. I don't remember when I first noticed the darker patch. At first, I assumed it was just my eyes adjusting, the way your vision shifts when you look too long at the same thing. But it didn't behave like that. The stars in that one spot weren't dim. They were gone. Just a small oval area where nothing shone through. I leaned forward in the chair, trying to shake off the after-image idea. But the patch stayed exactly where it was, oval-shaped with edges that looked too clean for a cloud, maybe the size of my thumb held at arm's length. I watched it for a moment, waiting for movement. Clouds drift, planes move in straight lines. Even birds at night have some kind of path. This thing just hovered. I stood up without even meaning to. The sky felt suddenly too close. After maybe 20 seconds, the oval shifted. Not downwind, there was no wind, not diagonally like a bird. It moved in a slow, steady line from left to right, the way a cursor slides across a screen when someone drags it carefully. The stars on one side reappeared as it left the area. The stars on the other side disappeared under it. Perfectly smooth motion. I kept waiting for the outline to sharpen or blur or distort, like something that would anchor it as a real object with real distance. But it didn't do any of that. Its edges stayed clean, unnatural, like the sky itself had been edited. I glanced toward the cabin. thinking maybe I should wake Rachel, but something about calling her felt wrong, or maybe I didn't want to take my eyes off it. The oval continued sliding until it reached almost the midpoint of the sky above me. It slowed, then stopped again, holding perfectly still. The silence around me deepened, not in a dramatic way, not like everything cut off at once, but enough that I noticed fewer crickets, fewer rustles in the brush. It was as if the whole area eased into a quieter gear without me realizing it. Then the air got colder. Not by much, but enough to make me feel like I'd stepped into shade even though I hadn't moved. I thought about going inside, but I stayed. Some part of me needed to see what it would do next. After a minute, maybe less, the oval started moving again, but this time the motion was different. Instead of sliding horizontally, it drifted upward, slow, steady, without acceleration. The stars it had blocked returned, one by one, crisp and without distortion. It reminded me of watching something submerged rise through water, except there was no distortion around it, no warping, no shimmer, just a hole in the sky moving higher. About halfway up, it paused again. Then it tilted. At least that's the only way I can describe it. The oval shape shifted slightly, not rotating like a disc, but changing its angle relative to me. It made no sound. It didn't glow or reflect anything. It just adjusted itself. And then it continued rising, faster than before. Still smooth, still silent, but definitely faster. The shape got smaller as it went up, shrinking into the sky until it wasn't blocking anything. Then it became a single dark pinpoint. That pinpoint flickered once. Then it was gone. Not faded, not blurred out, just gone. I stood there for several seconds, waiting to see if a plane or satellite would cross through the same area. Something to compare it with. Nothing did. The crickets picked back up gradually. The coldness in the air receded. I felt like I had stepped out of something without realizing I'd ever stepped into it. After a minute or two, I finally convinced myself to go inside. I locked the cabin door, even though it didn't seem like that would matter for anything that could blot out part of the sky. Rachel was asleep on the pull-out couch, breathing slow and steady. I didn't wake her, but I lay awake on the top bunk for hours, staring at the ceiling, aware of every tiny sound of the cabin settling. At one point, I got up and checked through the blinds toward the back of the house. The sky looked normal. In the morning, Rachel asked if I'd stayed up late and joked about me getting too old for outdoor insomnia. I laughed it off. I didn't tell her about the oval. I didn't tell anyone. But for the rest of the trip, I avoided going outside after dark. Even when the stars looked perfect again, I couldn't bring myself to sit in the same chair and stare up. Because every time I closed my eyes, even days later, I could still picture that exact shape. Not a shadow, not a cloud, not anything I recognized. Just a clean, dark oval drifting across a sky full of stars, like something blocking out whatever was behind it, and moving with purpose. I was driving back from my friend Dalton's place in rural Missouri, taking County Road 18 because the main highway was closed for construction. I'd driven that back route dozens of times, long stretches of flat farmland, the occasional barn light in the distance, and more radio static than actual music. It was close to midnight, a cold, dry night where the stars looked brittle and the air felt hollow. I had the radio on low, flipping through AM stations out of boredom. You can usually catch a mix of farm reports, old gospel, and whatever station from Arkansas decides it wants to reach farther than it should. Nothing exciting, just enough noise to keep me awake. Then every station went silent. Not static. Not a fade out. Silence. It happened so abruptly that I thought the radio had died. I tapped the knob, switched between bands, even smacked the side of the dashboard out of habit. Nothing. Just dead air. Even the soft hiss you expect when no station comes in was gone. I tried my phone next. No signal. Not unusual out there, but the combination radio dead, phone dead made my stomach tighten a little. I kept driving because what else was I supposed to do? The road was straight, and the only light ahead of me came from my own headlights cutting across the crops. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright at first. More like the faintest smear of pale light hovering above a field about half a mile ahead. Not white, not blue, something in between. A dull, washed-out color that didn't match any kind of farm equipment or vehicle. It wasn't moving, and it didn't pulse or blink. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was a tractor working late, but tractors bounce with the ground and cast shadows. This glow looked fixed, suspended a good 20 or 30 feet above the soil. As I got closer, I realized something else. The glow had no source, no outline, no visible object. Just light in midair like someone had hung a faint bulb on an invisible thread. My radio flickered back on for a split second. A burst of static and something that sounded like a clipped word, then cut out again. I stopped the car. Not slammed the brakes, just eased to a halt on the gravel shoulder. The engine rumbled softly, the only sound in the night. The glow stayed put. I turned off the headlights, thinking maybe I'd see it better without glare. Big mistake. With the road dark, the glow actually looked brighter by contrast, like the darkness around it emphasized how wrong it was. The farmland on either side of me was dead quiet. No insects, no wind in the stalks, no distant machinery. Just an unnatural stillness settling around the scene. I cracked the window. Cold air slipped in, but so did something else. A drop in pressure got subtle but noticeable, like my ears wanted to pop but couldn't. I swallowed hard. The pressure didn't leave. The glow flickered, not the kind of flicker you get from a bulb or flame, more like a brief distortion, as if something passed between me and it, though I couldn't see any movement. Then it started to rise. Not float. Rise. Straight upward with perfect precision. No wobbling, no tilt, no acceleration curve. It just lifted in a slow, steady line. 20 feet, 30, 50, higher. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in my palms. I leaned forward, gripping the steering wheel even though I wasn't moving. When the glow reached what I guessed was 100 feet, it paused, just hung there, motionless, like it was considering something. Then the radio turned on again. Full volume. A burst of static roared through the car, a harsh, tearing sound that made me flinch. I fumbled for the knob, but before I could turn it down, the static cut to silence, perfect silence, the same unnatural kind as before. Then through the speakers, a faint tone played, low, steady, mechanical. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. The glow shot upward, not quickly, not like a rocket or flare, instantly. One moment it was there, the next the sky above the field was empty. No trail, no afterimage, just gone. The radio returned to normal music like nothing had happened. I sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at the sky. My breath fogged and hovered longer than it should have. The pressure in my ears started to ease, but not all at once, more like a slow bleed-off. The air finally remembering how it was supposed to behave. When I turned the headlights back on, the field looked ordinary. Rows of dry corn, a fence line, nothing disturbed. I pulled back onto the road and kept driving, slower than before. Every few minutes I checked the rearview mirror even though I didn't know what I expected to see. About 3 miles later, the radio dropped to silence again. I froze. But this time after a few seconds, the static came back normally. Then the station returned. No tone, no burst of sound, just a regular glitch. Still, I kept the volume low after that. When I finally reached Dalton's Road, I pulled over again just to breathe for a minute. The sky above me looked normal, stars in their usual places, no movement anywhere. But the longer I looked, the more I noticed a weird after effect. The air felt slightly heavier than it had before. Not oppressively so, just full. Like something had passed through the atmosphere and hadn't fully dissolved. When I got home, I tried checking local news and weather reports. Nothing unusual. No aircraft, no storm fronts, no energy disturbances. Nothing I could hang a rational explanation on. I didn't tell Dalton. I didn't tell anyone. But now, whenever the radio cuts out unexpectedly, even for a moment, I wait. I listen, and I slow down a little, just in case the fields ahead are hiding that pale glow again, waiting for someone else to notice it hanging in the air before it rises into the dark. We were camping out near Lake Wapello that weekend. Me, my friend Jenna, and her younger brother Matt. Nothing fancy, just a tent, a fire ring, and a cheap cooler full of things we didn't feel like cooking. It was late September, that time when the nights finally start to bite a little, but the days are still warm enough to pretend summer isn't over. We'd hiked most of the afternoon, eaten a lazy dinner, and were now sitting around what was left of the fire. It had burned down to orange lumps and the occasional spark. The forest around us had settled into one of those deep, quiet stretches where every noise seems to come from far away. We had a clear view of the sky through a break in the trees. and it was the kind of night where the stars looked scattered too close together, like someone overfilled the sky. Matt was lying on his back, using his backpack as a pillow. Jenna was leaned against the cooler. I was poking at the fire with a stick I didn't really need to poke. That's when Matt said, "Hey, what's that one?" I didn't bother looking up at first. He points out stars all the time, but Jenna did, and the tone of her voice made me follow. "Which one?" she asked. "That bright one. Low. Straight over the lake." I tilted my head back. It was bright. Way brighter than anything else in that patch of sky. I assumed it was Venus or Jupiter, except it didn't look quite right. It was too low, just a little above the tree line across the lake, and it wasn't twinkling. Just a steady white light, round and sharp-edged. "It's probably a plane," I said, "but planes move. Even if you can't see their shape clearly, you can tell they're going somewhere." This thing was perfectly still, not drifting, not rising, not adjusting its position even a fraction. Matt sat up, his face dim in the dying firelight. It wasn't there a minute ago." "Are you sure?" Jenna asked. "Yeah, I was looking at the same spot." I watched it for a while, trying to force it to behave like something normal. But the longer I stared, the stranger it felt. There was no color, no movement, no blinking, no sound, just a white dot hanging where stars don't hang. A breeze passed through the clearing, shaking the tops of the trees a little. The light didn't move at all, not even the tiniest wobble through the branches. Jenna hugged her knees. "Okay, that is weird." I didn't say anything. I didn't want to feed the tension that was quietly building, but part of me felt uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I kept waiting for the light to reveal itself as something mundane, a helicopter, a drone, even someone's flashlight reflecting off something. But nothing fit. A few minutes passed. I'm not sure how many. The fire dimmed more. The air got colder. The forest noise, which had been soft but steady earlier, seemed to thin out. No crickets. No distant frogs, not even the rustling of small animals in the brush. The silence pressed in just a little too tightly. Jenna finally whispered, "Why isn't it moving?" Matt didn't answer. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension. "It'll move. Just give it." Before I finished, the light shifted. Not gradually, not like something changing altitude or turning. It slid, sideways, across the sky. A smooth, perfectly horizontal motion with no arc or dip. Not fast, but steady, like it was tracing a line. It left no streak, no trail. It didn't brighten or dim. It didn't pause. Just moved in a way that made my brain stutter. Things in the sky don't move sideways like that. Not without showing some kind of shape or flicker or color. This was like someone dragging a cursor across a black screen. Jenna stood up. Matt scooted backward until he hit his backpack. The light continued sliding until it reached a patch of sky where the trees blocked our view. It didn't come out the other side. It just vanished behind the treetops and didn't reappear. We all stared at the dark gap where it had gone. The forest stayed silent. I felt something like static settle on my skin. Not painful, just an awareness. The air seemed heavier, like before a storm, but without the humidity. My breath looked faintly visible even though it wasn't that cold. "Can you hear anything?" Matt asked quietly. I listened hard. Nothing. The complete absence of sound was worse than any noise could have been. Finally, Jenna said, "Let's go in the tent." None of us argued. Inside, the familiar canvas smell felt grounding, but the silence outside made it hard to relax. We sat there with the lantern off, listening to each other breathe. Every now and then, I'd think I heard a distant hum or low vibration, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just my pulse in my ears. After maybe 20 minutes, the normal forest sounds came back, not gradually, just all at once, like someone switched them on. Crickets, a rustle of something moving through leaves, a faint splash from the lake. Jenna let out a breath that sounded like relief. Matt muttered something like, okay. I wanted to look outside again, but I didn't. We eventually lay down, pretending we were going to sleep. I think we all just stared upward, waiting for something else. Nothing happened. In the morning, everything looked painfully normal. The fire pit, the lake, the tree line. Even the sky, bright blue and empty. Matt asked if either of us had dreamed anything weird. We hadn't. We packed up early, not really talking about it until we were already in the car. Jenna asked, "Do we tell anyone?" I said no without thinking. Who would believe we saw a star move sideways? Even I wasn't sure what we saw. As we drove back toward town, I kept glancing out the windows, checking the sky. My stomach tensed whenever I saw a plane, even though I knew exactly what it was. That night, when I lay down in my own bed, I looked out the window at the sky over my neighborhood. Quiet, predictable, ordinary. But sometimes, when a star looks a little too bright or a little too low, I watch it just a bit longer than I should, waiting to see if it holds still too perfectly, or if it starts to slide. I woke up around 3:20 a.m., which isn't unusual for me, but the reason I woke up definitely was. It wasn't a noise from inside the house, not the heater kicking on or the fridge humming. It was something outside, low, steady, and far away, like turbines spinning in the distance. Not quite a helicopter, not quite an engine. More like a deep mechanical whir buried under layers of air. At first I thought it might be a semi on the highway a mile west of my place. But the sound didn't move the way trucks do. It didn't rise or fade. It just lingered, smooth and steady. I lay there a moment, listening. The room was cold, and when I sat up, the blanket slid off my shoulders like it didn't want to help. The turbine sound wasn't loud, but it filled the space in the same way wind sometimes does, everywhere and nowhere. I got out of bed and walked to the window. My house sits on the edge of a wide field. Half-dead grass, a rusted fence line, and a patch of woods farther out. That field usually gives me a clear view of the sky. But when I opened the curtains, everything looked normal. No clouds, no movement, just stars and darkness. The sound didn't stop. If anything, it deepened. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to judge direction. It seemed overhead but distant, like something high up but massive. The kind of sound you feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. I slid open the window a couple inches. Cold air pushed in immediately. The turbine noise got clearer but not louder. Just more defined, like multiple layers of spinning, synchronized but different pitches. It didn't make sense. I live outside a small town in western Nebraska. No military bases, no flight paths at night, no factories. The nearest airport is tiny and closes early. Nothing flies out here at that hour. I shut the window and went downstairs, partly because I wanted a better view outside, and partly because my nervous system was waking up in ways I didn't love. The floorboards creaked in that way old houses do, like the wood wasn't sure what decade it belonged to. In the kitchen, I flipped on the porch light, then immediately turned it back off. The brightness made me feel too visible. I stepped out onto the back porch anyway. The air felt thick, not humid, heavy, as if the atmosphere had weight. Breathing didn't hurt, but each inhale felt slightly resisted, like the air had more substance than usual. The turbines kept going. I looked straight up, expecting at least a shape or a movement. But the sky was perfectly clear. No blinking lights, no trails, no silhouette passing between stars, just the noise, steady and mechanical. I walked into the yard, feeling the cold through my socks. My breath fogged, but not as much as it should have. Another small wrongness I didn't understand. I stood exactly in the center of the yard, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It seemed to shift when I moved, not following me, but refracting. Sometimes it felt directly above, sometimes slightly east. Like whatever caused it wasn't a single point, but a broad area. After maybe a minute, the air got heavier again. My ears popped, subtle but noticeable. I swallowed, then swallowed again, and the pressure didn't ease. I looked back toward the house to ground myself. It looked smaller in the darkness than it should have. A stranger's home, almost. The porch light switch glowed faintly inside the kitchen window like a warning indicator. Then the sound changed. It didn't fade or stop. It layered. A new tone joined the low whir, higher, faint, drifting in and out like a malfunctioning radio signal. Not static, more like a distant note played on an instrument I couldn't name. The higher tone wasn't rhythmic. It pulsed irregularly, as though responding to something unseen. I remember standing there thinking, this is wrong. Not dangerous, not definitely threatening, just wrong, like encountering something your brain was never designed to interpret. The turbine foundation of the sound began to slow. Not dramatically, but noticeably. The pitch dropped slightly, stretching thin as if whatever machinery or force was generating it was winding down. The upper tone flickered a few more times, then faded completely. The air pressure eased all at once. My ears cleared. I could suddenly hear the ordinary world again. The distant barking of a dog, the faint hum of a streetlight, Half a block away, the rustle of dried grass as the wind finally picked back up. And then the turbines stopped. The silence that followed felt too empty, like the sound had carved out space and left a hollow behind. I tilted my head upward again, scanning every inch of black sky. Nothing moved, no residual glow or trail, no evidence of any aircraft or weather event. The stars looked completely untouched. I stayed out there for another minute, waiting for a return of anything unusual. Nothing happened. The heaviness in the air lifted. My breath fogged normally. The cold felt like regular cold again. When I went back inside, the digital clock on the stove blinked 3:48 a.m. Power hadn't gone out. Nothing else was blinking, so I don't know why the clock did that. I pressed the button to set it again, but the minute counter skipped ahead twice before settling. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I checked online to see if any aircraft had flown over the area at that time. Nothing. Not even a weather balloon or a maintenance survey flight. The sky had been clear. No wind advisories, no seismic activity, no explanation at all. A few nights later, while sitting on the porch after work, I noticed something else. The field seemed quieter than normal. No crickets, no owls, no distant freight train hum, just the kind of quiet where your ears strain to find something. I tried telling myself I was imagining it because of what happened earlier in the week. But the silence sat there, heavy and expectant, until eventually the wind rustled through the trees and everything snapped back into place. I didn't hear the turbine sound again. Not that week, not since. But sometimes late at night when the house settles and the heater turns off, I catch myself listening for it, waiting for the sky to fill with a noise that shouldn't exist, a noise with no source, a noise heavy enough to breathe. It hasn't come back, but the air still feels different on certain nights, like something large and silent is passing high above, just out of sight. I was sitting on my back porch in Willow Creek, the little town outside Bend, where I rent a duplex that used to be a vacation home. It was around 10:30 p.m., early October, one of those nights where the cold felt clean and the air smelled faintly like sap from the pines behind the property. I'd brought out a mug of lukewarm tea I wasn't really drinking, just holding for the heat. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. It had been a long workday, and staring at the tree line was easier than looking at my phone again. The forest behind my place is dense enough that even in daylight it feels like it absorbs sound. At night, it's just a darker wall of nothing. That's when I noticed the light. It was faint, almost too faint to distinguish from the sky at first. But once I focused on it, I realized it wasn't a star. It hung just above the treetops, a soft, muted glow like someone had placed a lantern about 20 feet above the forest. Not bright enough to light anything, just bright enough that it looked out of place. It didn't flicker, didn't drift. It was perfectly still. I remember leaning forward in the chair, trying to decide if there was a logical explanation. A drone, maybe. People use them around here, especially on weekends. But drones have distinct lights, red, green, or white, and they blink. They also make noise. Even from a distance, they hum. This didn't. It just hovered there, quiet and steady, like it had been waiting for me to look at it. I watched it for several seconds, thinking maybe it would move or fade or brighten, anything. But it stayed exactly the same. A tiny, pale orb suspended above the trees. I stood up and walked to the porch railing. Still no movement. No sound. Not even a change in the way the branches below it looked. The light didn't illuminate the treetops like it should have if it were actually above them. It was more like it existed on its own layer, separate from everything around it. I remember thinking, in a very clear but uneasy way, that nothing should be that still. I took a few steps down into the yard, which was barely lit by a motion light near the garage. From that angle, I could tell the light sat slightly east of the house, close enough that if it were attached to something tall like a tower or construction crane, I'd know about it. Willow Creek doesn't have anything taller than 2 stories. The glow held steady, no change at all. Then, without warning, it began to dim. Not abruptly, not like something switching off. It faded gradually, the way a dimmer switch lowers a bulb. But there was no trail, no downward drift, no sound accompanying it. It just lost brightness, slow and smooth, until it became a faint smudge, then nothing at all. The sky looked completely normal once it was gone. Stars where they always are. No clouds, no sign anything had ever been there. I waited another minute or so, scanning the tree line, expecting it to reappear. Instead, the air pressure shifted slightly. My ears tightened for a second. Enough to make me swallow automatically. Then it went away. The forest remained silent. At that point, I told myself it was time to go inside. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly, just confusion. I wanted to understand what I'd seen before I retreated indoors. I walked to the edge of the yard until my shoes touched the first layer of pine needles. That's when I heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More like the absence of one. The crickets had stopped. The wind in the branches fell completely still. Even the distant hum from the highway, usually present if you really listened, had gone silent. It was like the entire environment hit pause. I didn't move for a good 20 seconds. The yard light buzzed faintly behind me, but that was the only noise. Then, all at once, the normal sounds returned. Crickets, the faint rustling of branches, a dog barking somewhere down the road. It happened so abruptly that it made the hair on my arms rise. I backed up toward the porch, keeping my eyes on the tree line in case the light came back. It didn't, but as I reached the steps, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Just a short vibration, not a call or text. When I took it out, the screen was blank. No notifications, no missed anything, just the lock screen. The time had jumped ahead 4 minutes. Not enough to be alarming on its own, but enough that I knew it was wrong. I had checked the time earlier when I went outside, and only a couple minutes should have passed. I chalked it up to my phone glitching, though it had never done that before. I went inside, locked the door, and looked out through the sliding glass window next to the kitchen. The trees were still. The sky looked normal. The kind of normal that felt overly normal, like I was looking at a picture instead of something real. I tried watching TV but couldn't focus. I'd glance out the window every couple of minutes, waiting for a flash or glow or anything to break the darkness. Nothing did. What stuck with me wasn't the light itself. It was the way it faded, controlled, deliberate, like someone dimming a studio lamp. And the silence, total, swallowing silence, right afterward. A week later, out of curiosity, I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Halpern, if she'd noticed anything strange lately. She's in her 70s, but sharp as anyone I know. She frowned a bit and said she'd seen a weird star sitting too low a few nights ago, but assumed it was her eyes. She mentioned it vanished like it was never there. She didn't seem bothered, just confused. I didn't tell her what I saw. I figured it wouldn't help either of us. Since then, I still sit on the porch sometimes, but I never let myself zone out the way I did that night. I always end up watching the tree line, waiting for a pale glow to appear again. It hasn't. But sometimes, right before the porch light clicks on, automatically, the air goes silent in a way that makes me hold my breath, just for a second, thinking maybe the dimming is about to start again. I was driving back from visiting my sister in northern Arizona, taking Route 160 through a pretty empty stretch of desert. It was close to 11 p.m., the kind of night where the air feels dead still and the stars look sharper than they should. My phone barely had a signal, but the GPS had loaded my route earlier, so I wasn't worried. It was just me, the road, and a handful of distant ranch lights that looked like stars sitting on the ground. About 40 minutes into the drive, I noticed the sky ahead didn't look right. It's hard to describe without sounding dramatic, but the stars over the horizon, right where the road seemed to point, looked fractured. Not blurry, not covered by clouds. The pattern of them looked broken, like a section of the sky had been smudged and redrawn by someone who didn't know how stars were supposed to line up. It reminded me of old TV static, except thin and horizontal, like a band stretching across the sky. The stars inside that band flickered, but not randomly, more like they were shifting in and out of place. I slowed down a little without meaning to. The road dipped slightly, so I thought maybe it was heat distortion, but the night was cold. I had the heater on low. There was no warm air that could have caused that effect. The pixelated look lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then everything snapped back to normal. Not gradually, just instantly. One moment the stars were glitching, the next they were perfectly still. I kept driving, telling myself it had to be my windshield. Maybe condensation, maybe I was overtired, but I wiped the glass with my sleeve, and nothing changed. I didn't get scared until the GPS spoke. Recalculating. The route line on the screen rerouted, making some weird detour north before connecting back to the same highway I was already on. There was no reason for it to do that. No turns available, no service roads, just empty desert and the yellow reflectors spacing out every 100 feet. I checked the estimated arrival time. It was 5 minutes later than before. 5 minutes isn't much, but it didn't make sense. I hadn't taken any wrong turns. I hadn't slowed down long enough for that kind of update. And the map looked strange, like the blue route line had been dragged by hand and then snapped back into place. I tried refreshing the app. No difference. The signal bar showed nothing, but the GPS shouldn't have needed data to stick to its original path. A few minutes later, the air pressure in the car shifted. Not dramatically, but enough that my ears felt stuffed for a second. It was the same feeling as driving up a mountain, except the road was flat for miles in both directions. The heater fan dipped in pitch, like the airflow was being pushed back. Then it returned to normal. I told myself it was nothing, but I gripped the steering wheel harder. Around the next bend, the headlights caught movement above the road, just a faint glint, like something reflective passing overhead. Not fast, not directly. A soft slide of light across the upper edge of the windshield. I leaned forward to look upward, but the sky was empty, just stars and darkness. No plane lights, no streaks, no satellites. A few ranch fences passed by on either side, and I kept checking their silhouettes against the stars to make sure the glitch wasn't happening again. Everything stayed normal. Then the GPS froze. The screen didn't turn off. It just stopped moving. The little arrow that represented my car stuck in place, even though I was still going 65. The map didn't update. The voice didn't say anything. It just sat there like the world underneath it had stopped existing. I tapped the screen. Nothing changed. My stomach tightened a little. I wasn't lost. The highway was straight, and there were mile markers. But something about the way the GPS had silently frozen made the car feel too quiet. About 10 seconds later, the map snapped forward, jumping from one point to another, like the app had skipped the distance between them. The arrival time dropped back to the original number. No explanation, no message. It felt like whatever had made the stars glitch had passed over me and moved on. But I wasn't done with the weirdness yet. Up ahead, maybe half a mile, I saw a small flash in the distance. Not lightning, there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. More like someone took a photo with the world's biggest camera. A brief, wide white blink near the horizon. I slowed again. The flash didn't repeat. When I passed the spot I thought it had come from, the only thing there was a short pull-off area with a bent road sign. Nothing unusual, no cars, no animals, just dirt and gravel. My GPS pinged again. Continue straight for 84 miles. It hadn't spoken in over half an hour, not since the glitch. The voice sounded normal, but the timing felt off, like it had waited until we were past whatever it didn't know how to handle. When I got to Kayenta, the first place with an actual parking lot, I pulled over at a gas station. The overhead lights flickered once when I got out of the car. That might have been normal. I didn't stick around to check. I restarted the phone, restarted the GPS. The route loaded normally, nothing strange. I stepped back and looked at the sky again. It was the same quiet star field as always. No bands, no distortion. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed over the highway, something the GPS didn't know how to route through, something the sky couldn't display correctly. I finished the drive, but I kept glancing at the stars through the windshield, waiting for them to glitch again. They never did. But the next morning, when I checked the GPS history, there was a blank spot for the exact few minutes when the sky looked wrong. Not a corruption, not an error, a blank stretch, like those minutes had been removed entirely. I was driving a long, empty stretch of desert highway late one night, the kind of road where you can go 20 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. It had rained earlier, so the air was cool and smelled like wet dust. The sky was clear except for a thin band of haze near the horizon. I was on my way back from visiting a coworker who lived way out past the last cluster of houses, and I was already thinking about how exhausted I'd be in the morning. I rounded a slow curve, my high beams catching the reflective posts on the shoulder. Everything looked normal until something flickered high above the road. so far up I almost missed it. At first I thought it was just the reflection off a plane or maybe a distant tower light. But as I drove a little farther, my headlights hit it again. And this time, it reflected back in a way that didn't make sense for anything that high above ground. The light bounced off something metallic, not a shape I could identify, just a brief angled gleam, like my headlights had caught the corner of a huge piece of aluminum hovering hundreds of feet in the air. It was only visible for a split second before the darkness swallowed it again. I let off the gas. I didn't brake, but I slowed down enough to feel the shift in momentum. The road was flat for miles ahead, so I rolled down my window and leaned forward, searching the sky. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to accelerate again, the reflection appeared a second time. This time I saw more of it. A slanted edge, smooth, sharp, not rounded like a balloon or curved like a drone. It was angled, like the side of a huge panel. It wasn't spinning or drifting either. It hung there completely still, tilted slightly toward me, like it had caught the beams of my headlights and turned just enough to return them. My first thought was some kind of weather equipment, but there were no towers out there, no power lines, nothing tall enough for anything to be suspended from. The nearest town was an hour behind me. I pulled onto the shoulder and turned off the engine. The silence hit hard. I could hear the cooling tick of the hood and nothing else. No wind, no insects, just quiet desert night. I stepped out of the car. The air felt heavy when I closed the door behind me. Not thick, exactly, more like the atmosphere itself had tightened. The sky above the road was black, except for stars, clean and sharp. I kept staring in the direction where I'd seen the reflection, half expecting it to shine again. Then, almost too faint to catch, something shifted. The metallic surface tilted. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle adjustment, like someone rotating a giant mirror a few degrees. But the tilt let the starlight catch it this time, not my headlights, and for a moment the shape outlined itself as a narrow, elongated object. I couldn't make out the full size, but it felt big, much bigger than a plane. It hung motionless. I realized my hands were trembling a little, though I wasn't cold. I kept listening for any noise, an engine, blades, anything, but the air stayed silent. Even the occasional far-off hum of the highway seemed gone. The object tilted again, like slightly upward this time. Then it rose. Not fast, not slow, just instantly upward without speeding up. Like one frame it was there, the next frame it was higher, and the movement between those frames was perfectly smooth. No acceleration curve, no buildup. It just went up. I felt a tight pressure in my chest, the kind you get before a panic attack. The object climbed higher, straight through the air, maintaining the same soft metallic shimmer from the stars. It passed through a thin patch of haze, the glow bending around it for a second, and then it vanished. Not faded, not blinked out. It was there one moment and gone the next, like someone hit a switch. The pressure in my chest released at the same time. The air around me felt normal again. A small breeze finally drifted across the road, carrying the smell of rain-soaked dirt. In the distance, I heard an insect buzz like the world had just resumed. I stood there a while, staring at the empty sky, trying to convince myself it was some kind of aircraft with strange lighting, or a satellite doing something weird with atmospheric distortion. But nothing I came up with matched the way it moved. Eventually, I got back in the car. My headlights swept over the asphalt in scrub brush as if nothing unusual had happened at all. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, engine idling, telling myself I needed to get home. When I pulled back onto the road, the radio crackled once, just a short burst of static, and then went quiet. The station didn't return until several miles later. I didn't see any other reflections in the sky for the rest of the drive. The night felt normal again, routine, predictable. But every time I passed a stretch of open highway with no lights around, I found myself glancing up, checking for something metallic hanging perfectly still in the dark, just in case it was still there. I was driving home from a late shift on Highway 12, the stretch that winds through the hills west of Morton. It was close to 1 in the morning, early spring, the air cold enough that fog clung low to the ground in slow-moving sheets. I'd driven that road hundreds of times, but that night, something about it felt different. Quieter than usual, heavier somehow, like the darkness had soaked into everything. The fog thickened as I climbed one of the small rises in the road. My high beams could barely cut through it, and every few seconds I'd slow down more than I needed to, just to be safe. Even the radio static felt oddly loud in the silence around me. At the top of the hill, I saw headlights ahead. At first, they looked like normal oncoming lights, bright, white, steady. But as I continued driving, the lights didn't seem to get any closer. The fog made it impossible to tell how far away they were, but the brightness stayed exactly the same. Not brighter, not dimmer, just fixed. I eased off the gas again, thinking maybe the other car was stopped or driving painfully slow. But the lights didn't shift, didn't bob from uneven pavement, didn't widen or narrow the way headlights usually do. They just hovered in place. I kept expecting to see the outline of a vehicle emerge, even faintly. With that kind of brightness, I should have been able to see a silhouette or reflections on the fog, but the space around the lights stayed dark. No hood, no grill, nothing. After another half mile, a knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't line up. I checked my speedometer. I was barely going 30. The lights still didn't move. I flicked my high beams off and on again. No reaction. Usually when two cars approach each other on foggy mountain roads, at least one driver dims their lights, but nothing changed. For a second, I wondered if I'd zoned out and the lights were farther away than I thought. I blinked hard, leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter. The fog swirled, but the lights stayed centered. Same distance, same brightness, like they were watching me more than approaching me. I rolled down the window a few inches to listen. The cold air hit me immediately. I expected to hear an engine, even faintly, but the road ahead was silent. Just the hum of my own tires and the soft hiss of fog brushing past. My heart started beating faster. I don't get scared easily, but there was something wrong with the way those lights hovered. I couldn't shake the feeling they weren't headlights, not in any normal sense. The fog began to thin as I descended into the next dip in the road. Slowly at first, then all at once, like a curtain pulling back. Patches of clear night opened on either side, stars visible through breaks in the mist. But the headlights, they were gone. Not faded, not veered off. Gone in the space of a second. The fog had parted like someone sweeping an arm across it, and the stretch of highway ahead was completely empty. No car, no taillights, no turnoffs where a vehicle could have pulled over. Just an open lane glistening faintly with moisture. I coasted a few more yards before I realized I'd been holding my breath. I slowed to a crawl and scanned both shoulders with my beams. If a car had turned off or gone down a ditch, I would have seen something. But the ground on either side sloped gently into wet grass and tall ferns. No tire impressions, no broken plants, not even tracks from an animal. Just silence. The fog behind me thickened again, creeping up the hill like nothing had happened. Ahead, the air was clear for the first time in miles. I was about to accelerate when something flickered in my rearview mirror. 2 faint points of light, far behind me, just barely visible through the fog. I froze. The lights didn't bounce or sway. They didn't brighten or dim with the road. They held steady, perfectly steady, like they had before. I turned my head to look back through the rear window. Nothing. No lights. No glow. When I glanced back at the mirror, the glass showed nothing but darkness. I felt the hairs rise on my arms. I accelerated gently, not wanting to slam the gas and lose control. My car climbed the next hill, engine humming normally, everything inside seeming almost too normal after what I'd just seen. As I reached the crest, the fog shifted again, curling across the road. My headlights swept through it, and for a split second I saw a shape. Not a car, not anything solid, more like a distortion, an area of air that bent the light wrong, as if something large but invisible had drifted across my path. It vanished before I could process it. The fog swallowed the spot whole. I didn't slow down again. I focused on the lines of the road, the edges of the guardrails, the sound of my own breathing trying to settle itself. Every now and then I checked the mirror, half expecting those impossible headlights to be there again. But the fog behind me stayed dark. A few miles later, I reached a clearer stretch where the sky opened up completely. It was almost jarring how ordinary everything looked, like I'd passed through a doorway without noticing. The trees glistened with leftover rain. The road smelled like wet pavement. The world looked normal. Except my dashboard clock was wrong. It had jumped ahead almost 9 minutes. My phone's clock stayed the same, but the car insisted I'd been driving longer than I knew I had. I reset the time manually, but a few seconds after I did, the minute digit flickered once before holding steady. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway with the engine still running. The fog hadn't followed me into town. The sky above my house was clear, but I kept thinking about the way those headlights never approached. How they hung in place, almost waiting. How they vanished at the exact moment the fog parted. How they reappeared behind me for a moment like they hadn't moved at all, but had only changed where they were looking from. I turned off the engine and listened. No fog, no headlights, just my porch light shining the way it always did. Still, I walked to my front door faster than usual, glancing at the road one more time before stepping inside, just in case the lights were still out there. I heard the clicking for the first time about halfway down the old service road behind Pine Hollow Preserve. It was early November, already full dark by the time I'd finished work, but I needed a walk badly enough to ignore the fading daylight. The preserve wasn't far from my place in Laramie, 20 minutes by car, then a mile on foot if you took the unofficial access path, and I'd gone there enough times to know the trail by memory. The night was cold, but clear. My breath puffed out in little clouds that drifted sideways in the light breeze. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant rustle of dry grass. No animals yet. Too early for coyotes to start yipping. Too cold for insects. I'd walked maybe 5 minutes before I heard it. A quiet, clicking sound. At first, I thought it was something in my pocket. Keys hitting metal, zipper teeth tapping. I stopped walking and shifted my weight. Nothing clicked. I took another step, and there it was again. A light, deliberate tap, 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 like two smooth stones being knocked together. I stopped again. Silence. I looked behind me down the road. Nothing but the faint silver line of moonlight on the gravel. No movement. I stood there for a few seconds, listening hard, then shrugged it off and kept walking. The clicking returned almost immediately. Only this time it wasn't behind me. It was to my right, just beyond the tree line. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, patient. I turned my head toward the sound. It stopped the instant I looked. I stood still for a while, trying to convince myself it was a bird. Some kind of night bird I didn't know, or maybe a deer shifting its hooves on frozen brush. I told myself anything that sounded remotely plausible, even though none of those explanations felt right. I kept walking. After a minute, the clicking started again, now on my left side. The same rhythm, the same distance, maybe 30 feet away. When I spun my head in that direction, it cut off instantly, like someone had released a muted switch. My heartbeat picked up, but I forced myself to keep moving. This wasn't the place to panic. There were no large predators around here. And even if there were, predators don't make clicking sounds and then politely stop when you look at them. I walked another 50 yards, breathing slowly, watching the trees with the edge of my vision. The clicking resumed. This time it circled behind me first, then swept lightly to the right, pacing me. The sound was so faint, I wouldn't have heard it if the night hadn't been so still. The cadence changed occasionally, not random, not steady, more like someone testing different rhythms. I turned my head again, quick. Silence. A gust of wind moved the tall grass across the field, making a low whispering sound. The clicking didn't return for several seconds, and I thought maybe whatever it was had gone. Then it started again, closer than before. Tap, tap, tap. Tap. I felt my throat tighten. I sped up my pace, but didn't run. The service road wasn't dangerous, but suddenly it felt wrong. Too open, too quiet. The clicking kept circling, never overlapping itself, never stepping into view, always out of sight. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 6:43 p.m., but the battery icon was low, lower than it should have been after being fully charged that morning. At the same moment, the clicking stopped again. The silence that followed felt thick. I turned the flashlight on. The beam shot out over the gravel and trees, illuminating nothing but bare trunks and the knotty shadows between them. No glint of eyes, no movement. I stepped backwards slightly to steady myself, and the clicking started again, this time directly behind me. Tap. I whipped around, shining the flashlight. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No trees close enough for something to hide behind. No rocks. Just open ground, the path stretching straight back, empty. My chest tightened. I started walking again, faster now, not running, just moving with that barely contained urgency of someone trying not to look scared. The clicking followed immediately, on my right, behind me, then on my left again. Every time I looked up, it vanished. Then something changed. The clicking paused mid-rhythm, not because I looked, because it wanted to. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The next sound wasn't clicking. It was a long, thin scrape, like something dragging lightly across tree bark. My flashlight beam wobbled in my hand. I aimed it toward the source of the scrape, and somehow, the trees looked different. Not physically, but the shadows between them felt deeper, thicker, like something was occupying a space that wasn't visible. My instincts screamed at me then, not because something